I'm calling this meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Mursky. I'm chair of the Ann Arbor Energy Commission. I am participating from my home here in Ann Arbor. Welcome to the November 9th, 2021 electronic meeting of the Energy Commission. This virtual meeting is to affect social distancing and to mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We will conduct this meeting similar to in-person meetings. Commissioners, during your roll call, please indicate your current location. During the meeting, please remain on camera as you would be visible during an in-person meeting. Also mute your microphone when not speaking. Public comments will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the two public comment opportunities, please call one of the following two toll-free numbers: 877-853-5247 or 888-788-099, and enter the meeting ID number 937-6751-6819. And these numbers will remain the same during the entire year for Energy Commission meetings. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16, AT&T channel 99, and online at www.a2gov/watchctn. Missy, would you read the land acknowledgement and then move from there to taking roll?
Thank you, Chair Mursky. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi, as well as Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained generally in unconscionable ways from Indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals. All right, moving into roll call. Commissioner Hookham.
Chuck Hookham from my Arbor Consultant's Office in Ann Arbor. Good evening.
Commissioner McComber.
Bridget McComber joining from my home in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Clevey.
Commissioner Clevey attending from my 100% solar home in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Levin. I believe Commissioner Levin is here. Chair Mursky.
Present, attending from my home in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Vice Chair Colvin Garcia.
Carlene Colvin Garcia from Ann Arbor.
Great. Councilmember Briggs.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Councilmember Radina.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner McCoy.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Commissioner, I'm sorry. Commissioner George is in the waiting room, so we'll come back to him in a second. Just moved him over. Commissioner Kerber.
Present from here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Overbeck.
Hello, everybody. I'm here in Ann Arbor at my home.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Juneau.
Present from my home in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Stevenson.
Here in Ann Arbor.
And Commissioner George.
Here in Delta Township, Ingham County.
Awesome. Chair Mursky, you have a quorum. You are also on mute.
Thank you. Yeah. So thanks very much. Thanks everybody for attending. Next on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I believe it was mailed out Wednesday of last week. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at it, as well as our meeting materials. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? So moved by Commissioner Cleve, second by Councilmember Briggs. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Aye. All, that's looks like it's unanimous. So no nays and no abstentions. So that passes. Next we have approval of the minutes. Again, the minutes are posted to Legistar. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at those as well. Any, well, first of all, motion to approve the minutes. Councilmember Briggs, second by Councilmember Radina. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Looks unanimous again. Thank you very much. So that brings us to public input. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you are watching on CTN, call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID number 937-6751-6819. As I mentioned, this information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated message that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet place, mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. So please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Do we have any callers?
We do, and just very quickly, I see Commissioner Levin is on the line, and if you can hear us, great. I can't move him over. It looks like he's only on the phone, so I can't move into the panel. So I just wanted to acknowledge he's with us.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for public comment, caller ending in 998.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Hello, my name is Zachariah Farah. I'm a senior at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and I live at 2222 Fuller Court. You may or may not remember me from calling in a few times to the Energy Commission on the issue of public power and establishing a public power utility. And I'm calling in today just to say that I'm very happy that the idea of an SEU is being proposed. I think it's a terrific idea, and I really hope that it will encourage business owners and residents to invest in solar panels for their properties. I think it's a great idea. I know that I'm speaking from my own personal experience. Like my family won't invest in solar panels because there's not that financial incentive, because they can't sell it back to the grid because of the pretty absurd laws we have in this state. But hopefully the SEU will be able to solve that in certain areas of our city. I'm also calling to thank the sponsors and the authors of this resolution that's going to be considered today. The resolution recommending the municipal utility feasibility study. I'm really happy that this is finally will be voted on by the Energy Commission. We've been calling in since I think February. I think you would probably know better than I would, but you had to listen to us after all. So I want to say I've never really seen such a movement in the city with so much enthusiasm and widespread support. We really want answers about establishing a public power utility. And so I do have a couple concerns about this resolution, though, although I'm very supportive of of the resolution overall. First of all, like I said, we've been calling it for a long time, and I'm wondering when this feasibility study might be finished, because we know that once we have the answers to our questions, we need to act quickly. We are running out of time to have some serious policy change in the city. And if this takes too long, I'm concerned that we're not going to have enough time to actually go and implement some of these things. And that kind of brings me to my second point, which is that in the second resolve clause, 5 different policies, I believe, are mentioned there. Again, I'm very supportive of an SEU. I'm very supportive of looking into public power, but I'm kind of confused why the My Green Power program is listed here. I mean, that's a DTE
30 seconds.
program, and we know it's insufficient. We know that's not going to get us to where we need to go. So I'm just wondering, that there doesn't seem to be a cap on the scope of this feasibility study, especially because it says including but not limited to. So I'm afraid, I guess I'm just concerned that if this feasibility study doesn't have a limited and defined scope, that we're going to be waiting for a very long time to get the answers that we need. And again, we're running out of time. So thank you very much for considering this resolution. The last thing I'd like to say is one question I've been getting a lot is, will a public power utility? Oh, okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you for calling in and sharing your thoughts.
Caller ending in 171.
Hi, my name is Susan Priller, and I live at 1356 Ravenwood in Ann Arbor, and I've been a homeowner here for about 20 years. In the past, I lived in East Lansing, Michigan, where we had a municipal utility, the Lansing Board of Water and Light. And personally, I much prefer the Board of Water and Light over DTE, but that's a different discussion for another day. I'm calling to support the Commission's resolution for the municipal feasibility study that Zach mentioned, the first commenter. I believe that such a study is superior to other comparative analysis, and a feasibility study will be more focused, more efficient, and less expensive. We need to know if the economics of municipalization will work in Ann Arbor, and I believe that a focused feasibility study is the best path forward. That's really all I have to say. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Caller, yeah, caller ending in 235.
Hello.
We hear you.
Hi. My name is Eric McCleary. I reside at 635 Hidden Valley Club in Ann Arbor. I was calling to support the municipal feasibility study as well, because I'm a new resident to Ann Arbor. One of the things I love most about this city is that we take the initiative on issues of climate, on issues of energy, and this feasibility study is how we move forward. We can't continue to rely on investor-owned utilities that put their investors and their shareholders ahead of ratepayers. And this feasibility is the next step in moving Ann Arbor forward, and therefore Michigan forward, because we are the example. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
That's all, Chair Mirsky.
That's all. Okay. Thank all the callers for calling in. And I'd like to remind everybody that there's also going to be an opportunity to comment at the end of the meeting. So if you have additional comments to offer, then we will consider those just as we considered those we just heard today and in previous evenings. So we now move into the meat of the agenda, and we really just have 2 related agenda points, both related to municipalization from 2 different perspectives. And the first on the agenda is a presentation of an Ann Arbor sustainable energy utility. There's been a lot of conversation of that in recent weeks, but not yet in this forum. And therefore, we thought it's important that we do that in this forum so that all commissioners have an opportunity to understand what's being proposed before we move on to consider the resolution as the other agenda item in the meeting. So Missy, I'd like to call on you. I think you're presenting. I don't know if you're going to hand that off to anybody else on your staff, but I'll let you control things from here.
Yeah, no, I gave them the night off, although I see some of them on the line here. They didn't take it. Well, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you for the chance to present tonight. I know we have a limited amount of time together, and while we have 2 agenda items, it would be nice if we got a little bit of our time back. So we'll see. But this is all questions welcome for tonight. And what I really want to focus on is what an SEU is and how it could operate in Ann Arbor and potential next steps. For those of you who joined our public discussion about this, some of these slides will be pretty familiar, but I don't want to assume that everyone was able to join that meeting that we had. So this really is more for members of the public. Thumbs up, see the screen okay? Great, I see some head nods, awesome. So for folks that are joining in, I know the commission knows this deeply. I just want to ground our conversation broadly in all things that we're doing in our local goals and objectives. So as you know, in November of 2019, Ann Arbor City Council unanimously declared a climate emergency, and they set the goal of achieving a just transition to community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030. And then in June of 2020, just a short year plus ago, they adopted the living plan and framework for how to achieve that goal known as 820. So when we talk about that, I'll intersperse that throughout the conversation with folks, but again, more for members of the public. And of course, key to grounding excuse me, our work in carbon neutrality is understanding what our greenhouse gas emissions profile is. So both the sectors that are contributing as well as the sources. And what we know from our greenhouse gas emissions profile is that the majority of our emissions come from our built environment, primarily from building electricity, but not far behind is the natural gas that we use to heat and cool our built environment. And then of course, as we're thinking about transportation fuels and the role of electrification of those fuels, that's going to play a really important role. And so this is just kind of a grounding as we're thinking about how to transition those sectors over. We know that we need to find solutions to our built environment that center kind of local generation, clean energy pathways, good paying jobs, et cetera. So I know you can't read this and you don't need to read this. The whole point is over the last few months, OSI staff and you all as the commission have systematically been evaluating lots of different pathways to reduce our energy related emissions. And these pathways that we've explored together have included things like on-site renewable energy generation, right? Things like our Solarize program or the Solar Faithful model and the PPA that's been developed from that. We are exploring virtual power purchase agreements and power reduction agreements, which we got through the VGP filing that we intervened in just over a little less than a year ago. We've talked about community solar. We haven't talked about the My Green Power program, but it's on our list of things to be exploring and really understand. We've had discussions about a traditional utility, community choice aggregation, renewable energy credit programs have kind of been on the periphery, but it's something on our docket to continue discussing. And of course, underlying all of these presentations and discussions, which may have felt like just presentations and discussions, was really getting us to a sense of what's possible. And the foundation of that is Michigan energy law. So the purpose of the rest of our time together is not to explore the pros and the cons of each of those options, a VPPA, a REC purchase, My Green Power, a traditional municipal utility. That's not what I'm going to focus on for this portion of the time, because the answer from where I sit is likely all of the above, or many of the above solutions are going to be necessary to hit a 2030 goal and target. Instead, I want to talk to you a little bit about the SEU concept. And it actually came out of this commission. In our March meeting, I don't know if you remember, but we had Attorney Brader who gave us kind of an overview of the Foot Act and Michigan energy law. And unrelated, at least in my mind, until the presentation happened, was a follow-up presentation from Paul Fenn on CCA, in which he talked about the history of CCA from 1.0, which really was a kind of REC purchase program, to 2.0, which became large utility scale solar buys, to 3.0, which became local decarbonization. And when those two presentations, which seemed quite different, were brought together, I saw a pathway, and I think some of you saw it too, and we sort of talked about it, which was, can we basically do what is effectively CCA 3.0 through a complementary utility? And this is how the SEU idea sort of emerged in my head and why we began to explore this, just to understand, is this actually a thing that might be possible? So I just kind of want to bring us back for a second to what Attorney Brader shared with us during your presentation. I am not a lawyer. I'm not going to attempt to do justice to the conversation that she shared with us. But the essence of that is she shared that the Michigan Constitution protects the rights of cities and villages to create their own municipal utility. And they can do that either via a taking, aka condemnation, and the buyout of the incumbent utility and their infrastructure, or via competition with that incumbent utility. And to date, every community that has started their own municipal utility in Michigan and across the country has done that. And just sort of naming, Zealand was the last in Michigan to do it. They officially formed in 1902 and sold in 1915, but preserved the right to rebuy. And so they bought themselves back in 1935. They were the last municipal utility to form in Michigan. But every utility that has done it through condemnation. And you can imagine why. Starting up a full set of poles and wires to directly compete with your incumbent utility is an expensive proposition, as is buying out their infrastructure through condemnation. But that still may be a viable path for us. But standing up an entirely competing set of infrastructure without 100% of the rate base is a really hard sell. Chances are your rates would be higher than your incumbent utility. So that got us thinking outside of the box of traditional competition. And what we know is due to massive improvements in energy technology and significant declines in the costs for things like solar and energy storage, which are going to continue to drop, maybe competition in a different way actually is viable, especially competition that focuses on generation. And that is the heart of the SEU. So I want to tell you a little bit more about that. What we thought about is, what if in our focus, we center that creating a parallel or supplemental or complementary or competing utility, whatever term you want to use, which is allowed. And what if we focus on generation? Don't focus on trying to duplicate the grid and all of the vulnerabilities of that grid, but instead be strategic with how much of a new grid we need to build. So that way, the cost of that infrastructure isn't in play. And that means we can focus more of the actual dollars on renewable energy and energy waste reduction. And so in thinking about that, we started to model what could be possible. And if that utility did focus on energy waste reduction and beneficial electrification, and of course, local generation through solar with storage and potentially geothermal, that's district level, could this happen at a pace that was fast enough to meet the goals and objectives we had? Was it legal? Was it technically possible? And the answer looked like yes. And so the basic narrative, or one of the narratives that we sort of hold, is switching from energy as a commodity to energy being a service within this concept. So just for a second, I want to share a little bit about the thinking behind this in terms of sequencing, because there's a lot that I just said, and we can't do all of it at one particular moment and scale up. So I just kind of want to ground this in some of our thinking. The very first thing is a vision of what is possible. And this was important because we didn't want to kind of bootstrap something. We wanted to be very, very clear from the onset. If we're going to try to create a municipal utility that is supplemental, what is the vision? What do we want to aspire for? What's sort of the mark that we're aiming? And so the vision was a sustainable energy utility for us in Ann Arbor would be a public utility. So it is municipal power that is 100% renewably powered, reliable, local, shared, and of course, publicly owned. And so that's the vision that we put together. And as we sort of envisioned it, we thought that the SEU would focus first on generation. So generating local clean energy that would feed directly into our homes, businesses, places of worship, community centers through behind the meter systems, which you can do today, right? And many of us have done. Mark just told us he's in a fully solar powered house right now, and that's exciting. And this clean energy, ideally, the way we've mapped it out would be paired with storage. And this would help improve energy reliability. As we know, we had issues this summer. Many of us lost power for an extended period of time. For those of us that have batteries, we fared a lot better than other folks within the system. So how do we pair solar and storage to help address the reliability concerns? But also in that phase one, it's not enough just to generate. We need to do energy waste reduction, deep energy waste reduction work. And so we modeled that being a core component of the SEU in phase one. And that also will, of course, improve comfort, lower bills, help those renewable energy systems on roofs go further in terms of meeting a constituent's energy needs. And then in the first phase, we also want to do on-bill finance, and that helps with some of the energy efficiency work. And I'm happy to take any questions about that. I'll jump in a second, a little bit more detail. Then over time, the SEU would grow to offer more things that are aligned with A20 that you see in the plan and we talk about a lot. Things like beneficial electrification. We could do geothermal, we could do transportation electrification, we could do micro and nano grids. And I want to be clear that when I say over time, I don't think that is an extended period of time. I think one of the things that became pretty clear is the need, if we're forming a utility, we have to sell energy. We need to generate energy to sell energy. That's sort of at the heart of what needs to happen in the SEU. All of those other systems can come into play. And with an infrastructure bill that just passed, we may expedite other things. But in the drafting of this, we saw generation, storage, and efficiency being critical. So the concept of the SEU really is grounded in energy choice, providing Ann Arborites another way to procure a large portion of their energy usage. And of course, one that's coming from clean, local, reliable energy sources. So to kind of further ground our thinking, I just want to bring this back. I'm not going to belabor these, but we at the onset identified not just that vision, but these objectives for how we wanted to think about an SEU and kind of the things that would have to check or whatever energy system we move forward. So we wanted to shift our energy system, of course, from being carbon intensive to being carbon free, which we all, I think, are working tirelessly on. All of you, I thank you for your help. We want to define solutions commensurate with the time frame and ambition established in our carbon neutrality plan, which means 2030. We've got to move pretty fast. And we know that emissions under the curve matter a lot. It's not enough on December 31st, 2029 for us to adopt a policy that gets to zero emissions. What we do today has really significant impact. So let's move quick, sort of the rationale. And we want to center the customer in this model, right? And make sure we give people the choice that they currently really don't have a whole lot of. We wanted to center low income and historically underrepresented groups in the system with a focus on affordability, sustainability, and comfort, making people's lives actually better, as opposed to kind of adding this as a burden. Viewing energy as a service and not a commodity that we're selling. It's really about a relationship and helping people improve quality of life. And of course, we're improving the reliability and eventually the resilience of our system more broadly. So I sort of mentioned this earlier, and I want to spend a few minutes more with you than I would perhaps in a general public discussion about the way we think about the SEU. And I broke the next two slides up into phase one, kind of phase 2+. So you can just kind of be with me sequentially. Okay, so framing. When we worked with our technical advisors, honestly, the question was, can we do this? Is this even legally possible? Is this bonkers? Is it enabled in Michigan law? Is this technically possible? What kind of policy changes would we need? And the answer was, yes, it's possible. No policy change is really necessary. Go. And so that allowed us then to go and to start envisioning what it could look like. So first and foremost, the SEU could enable a lot more people to get the benefit of solar. And the way we would do this is by directly paying for the installation on residential and business roofs. So they keep pointing to my roof, like you should know that I have solar on my roof, but I do, which is that indication. We could do this also on carports, ground-mounted systems, but we, the collective public, would be the ones owning that system. So residents would not have to put the capital down up front. They wouldn't have to come up with $12,000, $15,000 to install solar. Just putting a pin in this, you could still do that, and I'll talk about that in a minute and how you could participate in the SEU if you actually generate your own. But what would happen is someone would subscribe, a resident would subscribe to purchase their energy at a rate that's based on the cost of that solar system and the cost to operate the SEU, and they would pay a bill. Like what you pay per usage. You would just pay the SEU. And it would be coming from your roof, coming from your ground mount, and eventually in phase 2 through the microgrid that we hope to establish. This is important, right? And you would have a battery on site as well. So that way you have that kind of balancing of load and demand over time. This means that residents could still have power if the big grid goes down, which is happening more and more frequently. And this is already possible today, right? I mean, I have this system in my house. So this technology this isn't hard to envision being possible. Additionally, The SEU would not be limited by current utility restrictions that constrain solar system sizes, meaning 100% of your usage, or the amount of solar allowed within the whole landscape, aka the 1% cap. Those go away if we have an SEU because we don't set that and adopt that as our regulation or our policy. Instead, we would be able to maximize solar installations on viable locations, leveraging all that viable sunny space that we have in our community. And then, of course, the goal is over time, those individual solar systems get connected through a series of nano and microgrids, not DTE's grid, and more on that in a minute. The second part of phase one, kind of right out the gate, would be offering robust energy waste reduction programs. These would help people lower energy demand and improve comfort. Likely some of these services will be available to anyone, just like what you currently have through DTE. There's base appliance rebates that you can get. There's educational, there's audits. I hate that word audit. I'm going to try to take that out. There's audit does not poll well. No one wants to be audited. So an energy assessment, right, to help you identify saving opportunities. But the SEU could also offer on-bill finance, which is the next point, to help you make those improvements, which means you don't have to come up with a large pot of capital right up front to do your insulation or your building envelope work, or to help with that appliance retrofit. The SEU could help you do that and amortize that cost via on-bill finance over a longer period of time, ideally hoping to get you close to parity so your bills really don't change as you reduce usage. That incremental difference could go to pay back your loan. That's the ideal, not always possible, but that is something that we can work with constituents with because we have a different objective in the SEU. It's not about an instant ROI on that process. And this helps a lot more people access efficiency improvements, comfort improvements, renters, landlords, low-income tenants, et cetera. So the pairing of these two is actually really important as we think about kind of the equity and justice elements of this work. And also, if we're going to get 100% renewable energy powering our community, we need to lower our usage while we're also transitioning our usage to clean. So these are kind of the core things that we think we can do right out the gate with the SEU. And happy to talk about some of the conversations we're having with peers about on-bill finance and how we can leverage things like Holland's program to bring this to Ann Arbor. You are doing great, everybody. Thank you for sticking with me on this. For phase two, what we envision is the SEU transitioning to really focus on micro and nano grids that would be created to enable neighbors to share power across property lines. You can't do that today, but if we became a utility, we can. We can have energy pass across those property lines. That would mean if a resident needs more power than their solar system is able to provide, they can pull from the microgrid. Maybe that's from their neighbor or 3 houses down where the battery for the neighborhood is operating. They can, if you're generating more power, you can send it to the microgrid's battery itself. And of course, if you don't have good solar potential, but you have, let's say, glorious trees, we want you to keep those trees. So this allows you to participate in the SEU directly without having to take down those trees that are providing lots of other benefits. Of course, if you're a renter and you don't have a say in what's on your roof, these are other ways that you can participate. And the idea is eventually to get to a concept where the whole neighborhood can access and share this clean, locally generated power. In this phase of the SEU, we will have to stand up limited poles and wires, right, to connect households and businesses, which is why we talk about this as a limited poles and wires infrastructure. Going household to household, you know, in a dense neighborhood doesn't require as much infrastructure as thinking about a community solar program where maybe it's in a park and you have to run that power to the surrounding area. But that'll be an important part of this phase of work that's critical to ensuring its viability. And let's see, in the second phase, we also can look to create district level geothermal systems, although we're looking to pilot this really soon. This will help transition our heating and cooling loads to more sustainable sources of power, which is important, primarily, of course, getting off natural gas or limiting our amount of natural gas. And we can support beneficial electrification programs, helping people transition to electric appliances when they make sense for them. We can support vehicle electrification. And of course, on-bill finance can help us do this as well. This is an important tool. And we can pair things together. So we can go in and work with John Mursky, although his house is really efficient, but let's pretend it's not. We could go in and do this energy assessment, And we could talk about not just an energy assessment that talks about efficiency, but we could do beneficial electrification too. And then we can create a package that says, let's do these envelope improvements. Let's also do a switch to a heat pump because that makes sense for you. And let's go ahead and do that solar install. And we're going to amortize that over 20 years. And this is what your bill actually looks like, and we'll fund the capital. So that just opens up way more options for people than what currently exists on the market. And community solar is an important piece, and I sort of mentioned that before. And this is the reason this is in a later phase is because of those poles and wires and wanting and needing to stand them up to move those electrons. And then of course, we can keep growing. If we own the utility, whatever else happens and our community demands, we have the flexibility to be able to integrate. So that's sort of the concept and the potential offerings. And I know that was a lot to digest, but let me bring it back just for a second to the core of the SEU. The SEU is a municipal utility. It focuses on generating local clean energy fast. It's about leveraging existing technologies and practices, especially in phase one, such as solar and storage, to reduce emissions quickly while improving reliability. It's about ensuring that all Ann Arborites have access to solutions to improve comfort, reduce bills, and reap the benefits of the clean energy economy. That means if you can't do solar, you might still be able to do energy waste reduction programs through the SEU. So everyone would be able to access initiatives. And the SEU, as I mentioned before, is it's fundamentally at its core about generation, local generation. There is limited distribution of that energy because it's staying in the community. It doesn't need to go somewhere else. We're generating it, we're using it. It means we don't have to worry about buying a lot of poles and wires, at least not from the offset or outset. And it means we're helping build some reliability to extreme events, which are happening more and more frequently and taking power out more frequently. So that's sort of the broad concept. I'm going to just bring a few last points kind of with us in our discussion. This was an assessment we did about how the SEU aligns with the Energy Commission and City Council adopted energy criteria and principles. And the good news is it aligns well with those goals and principles. And this is kind of one of the filters that we, at least as staff, are really running different things through. So it passes an initial sniff test. And before I close out, I just wanted to share a few examples of how the SEU could work. And this is not meant to be an all-inclusive list of examples, but just something to kind of help ground the concepts as we're thinking through them. And you are the first people to see this, so here we go. If we mess up, I can't wait. You'll tell me. I know you will. You're all really good at that. So let's start with the example of a homeowner or a business owner that has good solar potential, but doesn't have the capital or the interest upfront to install solar on their roof. In this case, the individual could subscribe or enroll in the SEU as a supplemental utility to DC. The SEU would work with that homeowner to conduct a needs assessment, identifying potential energy waste reduction and electrification opportunities they may have because we're in that home. Let's do it all at once, kind of a whole home assessment. Those selected opportunities would be implemented as long as the homeowner wanted, of course, them or the business owner. And the homeowner would have the option of financing those through the SEU's on-bill financing program. Any rebates that the SEU has or programs would help lower the costs of those improvements. And then the SEU would strive to create this financing package where the electric bill is as close as possible to the same or to the current electric bill that the consumer has. That way, even while paying back those improvements, there's not a huge spike in usage. And that's the goal. I acknowledge that is not always going to be possible. And then, of course, once those improvements are paid off, the resident reaps the full benefit of those improvements, the reduction in utility bills, et cetera. So simultaneous with above, while we're in there, the SEU is installing that solar and storage system, and the resident is paying per kilowatt hour of usage, similar to how they pay their current utility bill through DT. I hope that makes sense. That was first round of example one. And thanks to Julie Roth, who's on the line, because she and Hannah on our team drew these pictures and modeled these. Second example is an SEU without on-site solar. So in this case, the resident gets all the same benefits as what we just talked about in scenario one. The difference is the resident's not hosting solar on the roof, but they can still do any electrification, energy waste reduction improvements, choose to finance those through on-bill finance, and they can sign up for the wait list So once we get the nano and microgrids up and operational, they're in the queue to start pulling power from the system. And this resident also would receive 2 electric bills or on-bill finance bills. They would have the bill from the SEU and they would have the bill from. What if, like many of you, someone already has solar on their roof? So in this case, the way we thought about this is that the owner would enroll in the SEU. The SEU could still assist like they did before with electrification and energy waste reduction improvements. They could finance those through on-bill finance. They could pay upfront, totally flexible. And then the resident would use power from their existing solar system, just like they do. And any excess is, they have the option of selling it to the SEU to go into the microgrid or the nanogrid. Or if they don't have a battery, the SEU could provide a battery and they put it into the battery system. Or they could keep selling it to DT at the current rate. So they have options of how to participate. Moving on to another example here with renters. So this is one which would be done in coordination with landlords, and we've had some preliminary discussions about this. And this actually really does help with the disconnect that exists between who pays the bill and who actually finances the improvements. Because in this case, if the SEU is financing all of the improvements, then it's not really a negotiation about whoever is paying that bill is reaping the benefits of the SEU installed system. So this helps actually negate some of the challenges that we've been facing about making improvements in rental properties. So this could be done in traditional SEU. We're also in OSI working on green lease programs. On-bill finance helps enable these improvements in the same way it does for other people. And it helps them stay, I should have said this before, on-bill finance stays with the property. It doesn't stay with the person. So if Commissioner George does all of these beautiful improvements, so excited to sign you up, he doesn't have to keep paying them when he moves somewhere else. It stays with the home that he is in, whether that is a rental or a single family home that he owns or a multifamily home, because they reap the benefits. All of the benefits stay in that infrastructure. And so the cost stays with that infrastructure. So this is one of the nice things about on-bill finance, which is different than me taking out a loan to put solar on my roof. When I leave, that loan is still in my name. One last example for you all is a community solar program. Now, again, this is a little bit later in the phasing of the SEU. And here the idea is these are larger installations that happen in the community. They might be rooftop installs, they might be ground mount, they might be carports. And here we would have a host for that solar that is feeding multiple areas. And I often think about, I often think about community solar in places like parks that can feed into neighborhoods, or you can imagine us having installs at schools. And that could be an opportunity because the school's use profile is very different than what the community traditional residential use profile is, right? Summer, we don't really use our schools, and that's where we're max generating on solar systems on schools. So they could be a really important piece of the infrastructure here. And what we would be doing is standing up the additional poles and wires to move those electrons from where the point of generation is to where we actually have our subscribers within the SEU model. This example is just a carport that we could do, especially at multifamily sites. Carports will probably be something. We've modeled some work in that. So just to kind of close out then, I want to kind of end our discussion by talking about logistics and the next steps that we model to creating the SEU. So creating an SEU is, first and foremost, and when I name this, it is not a novel endeavor. The city has the building blocks needed to administer it. We currently administer our water, wastewater, water recovery, and stormwater systems. We do billing already. We can leverage infrastructure that exists within those utilities. We can also leverage infrastructure that exists in other municipal utilities in places like Holland, where they do on-bill finance. And what's really exciting is every element of the SEU I told you about exists somewhere. What is unique about the SEU is how we're piecing them together. And that is a challenge, but that feels like a surmountable challenge, at least from where I sit. That is good news, kind of broadly. In terms of how we structure the SEU, we have some initial thoughts that you'll see in the resolution. This is one of the things that if the Energy Commission is interested in, and Council is too, we'd like to go back and actually do much more in-depth modeling about what's possible. So one of the things about the SEU is we could choose to staff up and have an entire staff that does these installations, that manages customer service and billing, or we could choose to really focus on billing and customer service and doing the energy assessments and really focusing on the relationship with people, and then working with the private sector to do the installation. And that's a little bit different of a model because for those of you with solar, you know, those systems don't really need a lot once they're up. And so the real work is getting good installations in place with trained, qualified individuals. Once they're up and operational, there's not really as much to do with them. And so that's a discussion that we need to have and figure out what the best structure for the SEU would be in terms of staffing. And we also have to figure out how it would be governed and managed. And there's a lot of flexibility here. We could do that through a chief administrative, which is administrative personnel, which is kind of how we operate now our utilities. We could do that through a public board. There's lots of options and lots of good examples across the country. So another next step is to kind of model and give scenarios for how this could be managed should we want to move forward. But there's a lot of flexibility, and that's good news. And there's a lot of flexibility in terms of adjusting offerings and services to meet the needs of the community. And we really do feel like even since we released this report, we've had many, many more conversations. We had many before and while we were doing the report from peers around the nation who are just sharing their best practices, their lessons learned, their failures in the landscape. And so we're excited to keep learning from those peers and kind of leapfrog where we can. So in closing, our technical, legal, and policy analysis regarding the SEU found just a few steps necessary to move the concept forward, should that be of interest to our community. I don't want to presume that it is, but if it is, go with me on this journey. First, our advisory committee recommended starting a wait list to understand community interest in joining the SEU. This actually will help with step 2, which is the rate analysis, and that determines what the rates would be to roll out the various phases of the SEU. So engaging interest in the SEU, the target audiences that we've identified are customers that have significant energy demand, customers who are efficient to serve due to location or high interest from neighbors, and that really is more kind of phase 2 for the microgrid. Of course, residential and commercial customers who are struggling with reliability and unequivocally low income and energy burdened households that could immediately benefit from having reduced energy costs. So those are kind of the targets that we would want to go after, but we would also, in doing a wait list, want to kind of do a broad swath. We'd want to hit every Ann Arborite and spend a little bit more time and effort, for example, in our communities that are suffering from a high percentage of energy burden. In kind of simultaneous with those steps, the rate analysis and the wait list, you heard me mention this on the last slide, we identified needing to create potential governance structures and staffing needs for the SEU. Fourth, the actual required step is the passing of an ordinance that would enable the creation of the SEU. And City Council can actually do this. Our charter already gives us the right to start a publicly owned utility. So the ordinance is actually the only required step that we have to move forward. All of the others are kind of good governance and modeling to make sure we understand demand. However, for 5, staff also recommend almost immediately, if this moves forward, that we should engage with someone to do a really detailed technical analysis of all of the details necessary to implement micro and nano grids. Things like power dynamics, backflow, two-way power flow systems, what kind of density we need to have, what kind of wires we want to stand up. And we've actually already identified a few neighborhoods. We've had a few raise their hand that want to come into the SEU, and we've identified some of our target areas that we would like to model very specifically what the dynamics would be for that, because we recognize that is probably the most complicated piece of this work. It is completely in the realm of feasible. The technology exists to do this type of work, but the question is, does that technology actually match up with our system in a way that's economical, and how and what systems would we want to use? So we've been in discussions with folks like the National Renewable Energy Lab, who've offered a lot of assistance in this space and offered to help be advisors to us as we move into this. But we would like to initiate pretty rapidly this technical assessment. And then lastly, we have to determine how we're going to fund the SEU should we want it to move forward. And to be clear, when I say fund, I don't mean forever. We just have to get the seed capital to start the work. And then the SEU must be self-sustaining and likely generate revenue for the rest of the city. That could go into the general fund. We could choose that for other purposes. But we do have to determine where is the seed capital coming from. And that could very well be from grants, philanthropy, public-private partnerships. We just passed the infrastructure bill. We've been talking to DOE and EPA about potential funding sources. It could be borrowing, it could be debt. There's all kinds of options. And what we know is that if we go for debt, then we do have to do a vote of the people. But if we're doing a grant or we get some of this offset in another way, we don't actually, because that's money coming in. So there's a potential next step with the funding source, depending on how we want to finance this moving forward. So I know that was a lot. I'm sorry I talked so much at you. I apologize. I just wanted to make sure you had a little bit more detail and an opportunity to kind of ask questions about why, the rationale, what. So at this point, I'm going to stop and just thank you.
So we're going to open things up for questions, as Missy stated, and we already have our first. Commissioner George.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the first question I had for Missy is dealing with the last slide that you had there in regards to the startup costs. I was curious on what number, if there was a number that you and your staff had come up with to start with, and whether or not, if you were to make the decision today, I do love the idea of being able to go and start immediately and move as quickly as possible. So avoiding going to the ballot box if possible. Obviously, that also brings in uncertainties as well. So would it be within the city's budget? Are these grants that you referenced, realistic that we could get them quick enough to stand this up next year?
All of the above. So one of the things that is both valuable and to be determined with an SEU is we can start with anything. We could start with $100,000 and do just 2 installs or 5 installs, or we could start with $10 million and do many more. So part of the wait list is also to understand the magnitude of need right out the gate, that we sort of have an interest in that. So I recognize that's not a direct response to you, but it means we can start with whatever we have. We do have some money in our budget that we could do some installations if council voted for this really fast. I mean, not a lot, but a little bit. And then the grant funding, we're just not going to stop. I think the infrastructure bill, I don't yet have a really good handle on. If anyone has digested it, please let me know. But that's something that I anticipate there could be some funding available. And we've had people call us about this as well. So we're starting to investigate what kind of dollars we might be able to unlock to bring this to fruition.
Gotcha. And unrelated question to that, obviously you've mentioned a lot about solar, you mentioned geothermal a little bit. Those would be the 2 primary renewable generating sources. Are we looking at any sort of mass solar field, or are we looking at any sort of wind farm generation? When we're talking about this, are we talking about generating power solely within the city and the county? Are we looking at, building, financing, working with partners possibly to build some sort of offshore wind farm in one of the Great Lakes, something like that? Or are we just solely thinking within the county and the city?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we started very much with what we could generate here within the city itself. And the rationale would be, as you go further, you have to build infrastructure to move those electrons, right? So our analysis, we worked with Google and did an assessment and actually found a lot more solar potential than we knew existed within our own community. Alas, we don't have good wind potential. We've done a few assessments of it. So over time, especially the SEU, one of the nice things about it is it doesn't preclude any of the other pathways we've talked about. So if we grow to want to do a virtual power purchase agreement or to form a traditional utility, those things can still happen because we'd have the mechanisms and we'd have.
Gotcha. And my last question, insofar as staffing capacity, right? Because obviously to stand this up and continue to grow and so forth, obviously there's the cost of the actual infrastructure that you're building and you're creating and, working with the public, but, and it does sound to some degree like you're creating and expanding a whole department, right? And so where would the money for the additional staffing costs come from? And it sounds like it does, that there would be a need at some point to go to the ballot for money.
No, so it depends on how we fund the seed capital, but the staffing would be covered in the rates, right? All
Okay.
the infrastructure and the staff, it's part of what you pay for when you pay for your electricity kind of coming through. So the answer of exactly what that would be sort of depends on how we want to staff it. Do we want to have the installers on staff? Do we want to contract that out and have really us focus on customer service and billing? So that is sort of one of the asks was doing the governance model and the staffing to run different scenarios so we could actually get to that rate analysis that includes different options and make a more informed decision.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we would not be asking for more funding. And also thank you for your vote of confidence that I could run the SEU. Probably not my skill set.
Commissioner Kerber.
Yes, just from an overall standpoint of the legal standing of the SEU, I assume it's going to be a nonprofit extension of the city of Ann Arbor, and there will be no other external shareholders whatsoever, no other investments that would have any say in terms of the direction of this unit.
Yeah, you're right. The one thing we have had some discussions about is there are entities who might want to take advantage of the federal tax incentive to help lower the cost. And so those could be in play. I don't know if they are, but no one would have a say in the SU. This would be governed. It would be a public utility, and the people that would have the say are the residents of Ann Arbor.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
As you might expect, I probably have 4,000 questions on this one, but I'll try to keep it brief. I think one of the key topics, Mr. George raised this, Mr. Kerber danced into it a little bit, is the economic side, what makes sense. And I think that, Missy, as you move forward, that us as a city, we have to put some smart steps to make sure we do capture the federal tax credits you can get. I think that we need to be very careful about diversity. Mr. George was pointing to the idea of just solar. I think most of you attended my session when I talked about our example where I did a study in Lansing, and I built the Lansing current solar system. It's the Delta Solar Project that feeds LBW. And we also did some work with the wind side of Lansing. We know that their load's about the same as Ann Arbor's. Some really bad things happen when clouds fly over solar systems. And you can have the fastest, largest battery in the world, and guess what happens? It doesn't help. There's little things called inertia that come into play in a lot of electrical terms that I won't bore this audience with. I just caution us to be careful and make smart steps. It's great to be aspirational and put as much energy into something like this as we can. We also have to be mindful that there's not too many of these that exist. There's a total of 5 in the country. None of them really look like Ann Arbor's, so we would be the first of a kind. I've tried to procure financing for first of a kind adventures before. The city has lots of good benefits there that we don't have as a developer, but there's some issues there that we need to be cautious on. And public safety comes into play here. If we start banking on this SCU basically serving our constituents, we're taking on some risks, liabilities, indemnities, many other legal issues. I think Mr. Levin from our commission could vouch on legal issues that might pop up on something like this that we really need to be careful of, that I've lived my career dealing with. So I'm happy to help going forward, looking forward to the discussions on SCU. Just be mindful that there are lots of sleeping issues here that weren't covered that we could spend hours on, and I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. Commissioner Peck.
Hi, thank you. Missy, you did a great job of explaining it. And I thought that there were undoubtedly many, many issues as we're starting to hear allusions to that we can work out later. But I had really 2 simple questions. One is, I guess if it's on bill financing, that means if you have a house and you live in it for 3 years and then you sell the house, the costs just go with the house to the next owner. That's question 1. Yeah.
Yep, that's correct.
And the second one, which I think I know the answer, which is no, have you discussed this with anyone at U of M yet?
Yes, I have actually.
Oh, cool. What's the context there? Because I think what we're doing now is we're hiring that person that we said we would hire, we being you and me and the others on the President's Commission on Carbon Neutrality, to report directly to the president and sort of be in charge of everything. That person we're going with a national search firm and all that. So we'll get a heavy duty hitter, I think, but we haven't hired that person yet. So I'm just interested in what's going on campus in your discussions then. Thanks.
Yeah, the answer is all things are going in those discussions. There is definitely interest, and I'll say, just to kind of move out of just UM, we've had this conversation with AAPS and others about the SEU because we want, large consumers within the system. And I think there's excitement, and they show me what it does for me kind of mentality. And that's where we need to get to, right? Which is where we need to do the rate analysis and be able to show them exactly what this would do for them and how this would impact. And as you know better than anyone, Peck, with the scope 2 goal first, if we're doing an electric utility and we can generate electricity on site at a lot of these places, well, that's the first goal out the gate for the U. So I think there was interest. I wouldn't say there was like signing on a dotted line, but the conversation was really constructive.
Great. Thank you.
McCoy.
Yeah, thanks, Missy. The presentation was really helpful. And if Julie's listening, thanks for the examples. Because I feel like a lot of my questions were answered through the scenarios that were laid out. So that was really helpful. So thank you for that. A couple questions I had. One, I mean, you mentioned just now that Google helped you find that there was more solar potential than you originally thought, which was helpful to hear, because I remember when Paul Fenn first presented it, there didn't seem to be that significant amount. So I'm wondering if right now it's still determined that in the ideal scenario where we get as many people signed up as want to get solar everywhere that can Ann Arbor, is there an ability for Ann Arbor to power itself, or will we still need some people to be relying on another source of power, with this additional that you were able to find? And then, my other question, as you were talking, I was thinking, I don't know if this is, Chuck, what you were alluding to. I'm just wondering, how, does this just make Ann Arbor a mini Texas, right? That's isolated from a grid in ways that could be bad during storms, or is this different than that in ways that aren't as terrifying?
Yeah. Oh, did you have another one, Amber?
No, I think I was just looking at my notes. I think those were the two main questions I had.
Okay, great. If another one pops up, let me know. So in terms of the amount of power, what we actually found, and I'm going to caveat this in a second, is over 400 megawatts of potential within Ann Arbor, which is way more than we thought. And we're unpacking how that happened to go from under 100 megawatts to this projection, and it's a few things. One, solar is just much better, right? And it's able to generate more than it was before, but that does not mean that all of those potential additions are really economical. So that's kind of the next assessment, right? Is how much of this is marginal solar versus how much of this is really good solar potential that makes sense to bring online. Our total community usage right now is about 440 megawatts. So there's a gap. The way that we modeled this was, sure, energy waste reduction lowers that, right? Because we have efficiency to gain within the system. But we imagine that we're picking up all of our efficiency gains through electrification, right? So that's kind of a display. It's like a wash in our modeling. And so that means we have this marginal gap that we've got to try to figure out how to fill. So hopefully that answers that first one. The exciting thing, though, is it's not as big as we thought it was. So that was something I was really excited and questioned a lot of that data. And then in terms of mini Texas, and to Chuck's point too, this is a supplemental utility, which means we are not islanded. And that is good and bad. The good part of that means you still get power from DTE if, heaven forbid, your microgrid goes down. It also means if DTE's grid goes down, you still get power from your microgrid. Or if we're not in microgrid and we're in phase one, you still get power from your solar and battery storage. So it's actually a redundant system that you have, which makes us totally different than that model. Did that answer your question, Amber?
Commissioner Clevey.
Yes, I was just going to speak to that point as well. In 2016, the Energy Commission did a solar feasibility study in partnership with the U.S. Department of Energy and one of their contractors. And Chairman Mirsky and myself and Chuck Hookham worked on that. And we found, upwards into 300,000, 300 megawatts worth of solar potential in Ann Arbor, of which we only needed 78 megawatts, which is roughly consistent with the A20. So, discounting the technical potential of solar stuff to get us where we need to do, we've got a lot more potential. And I know that the stuff that Missy's been looking at, we didn't even look at commercial buildings, we just look at residential. So there's a huge potential for self-generation in here. I think our problem is going to be figuring out how to figure out which ones are the best sites versus ones that are marginal, and coming up with some kind of a system for that. And the other part, I just want to make a compliment. Since the Office of Sustainability and Innovation was created, I've probably been a rock in Missy's shoes saying, when are you going to unleash the innovation part of sustainability and innovation? And I just want to compliment you on your apt use of innovation in meeting our A20 goals with this Sustainable Energy Utility Initiative. It is innovation at its best. So thank you, and great job.
Thanks, Mark. And just one quick point I forgot to say, Ember, to your question and to what Mark just said. Our assessment was only rooftop potential. So we got 400 megawatts only on rooftop. That's not carports. It's not community solar ground mounted systems. So we'll pick up something there. That's just a little harder to model citywide.
Thanks, Mark. I might add, just anecdotally, when we had Howard Lazarus as city administrator, I recommended to Howard that he add innovation to the name of every single department in the city of Ann Arbor. So maybe that's something we can reconsider again. Well done, Missy. Thanks, Mark. Commissioner Juneau.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation, Missy. Yeah, I just want to echo what others have already said. I think this is such an exciting opportunity to really truly center decarbonization and energy efficiency, and creating a decentralized grid, which is going to be really, really hard to do in most of the other options that we have here, right? So that's the future, I think, in so many ways, and I just think this is really, really great to see this developing. I guess I kind of have a question too. I imagine, this being a little bit more piecemeal, either household by household or neighborhood by neighborhood uptake. Like, how do you foresee some of those kind of more social challenges, as we move this out throughout the city, and how do you foresee being able to handle those, or what kind of programs or different actions might be necessary to kind of bridge the gap between, helping people understand this is something that could benefit them, and getting them to actually participate in a program like this?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I think we would unequivocally welcome guidance, advice, and leveraging of networks in that space. Some of the things we've initially kind of mapped out. And again, nothing has been decided in this. No one has told us we're doing this. So this is just kind of us preliminarily planning. Everything from, of course, every single resident mailer, boots on the ground, using our ambassadors, knocking doors, giving testimonials of people who are excited and who have signed up, showing their actual energy bills and the utility and the use of the SEU and how it's improving their life or not. And I think we're going to have to use every tool in our toolbox to reach people in this. There will, if I speak very candidly, from our office standpoint, we really want to emphasize low income and energy burden folks. So I expect we're doing, like, our team is door knocking in that way. Our team is having meetings in those communities and investing a lot of time and effort. And I would turn to my council colleagues too and say I imagine if council directs us to go, we're working real closely with council to make sure their constituents know about this opportunity.
Cool. Or excuse me, sorry, Commissioner Stevenson.
Thanks. Hey, Missy. Great presentation. I thought it really explained a lot of stuff for me. So I thought it's new. I'm excited to see this, go in Ann Arbor and maybe hopefully reach somewhere. I had a question about reliability aspects. And just so if we're not buying the poles and the wires, which is what I usually think about when I think about improving reliability, are the main factors of this the degree of reliability from this like the microgrids and like the locally controlled and local access, stuff like that? Or can you speak to that a little bit more for me? Thanks.
Yeah, there's two levels of reliability. So in phase one, it's by having basically a redundant system. Or DT becomes your redundant system, if you will, where you've got solar and storage on site, which means you are able if you just have solar, you don't get the benefit of solar if the big grid goes down, because you can't push electrons out onto that grid, right? You can't harm workers on the grid. If you have a battery, however, what you can do is have your solar feed that battery, and the battery feeds your house, right? So the big grid is down, but you're still getting power. So that's kind of phase one, how we address reliability. Phase two is through the microgrid. So big grid goes down, microgrids could still function. Or microgrid goes down, big grid still functioning. You have kind of that redundant system in operation.
Great, thanks.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes, thanks for the presentation, Missy. A few questions. So first of all, I mean, we've talked about doing this feasibility study for a municipal utility, and I'm wondering, is this like another option that we could consider at the same time in that feasibility study? Is that going to cost more than kind of what we were ballparking before? Or I am excited about this as, I would say, a more likely scenario and a lot less legal issues that would come into it. Yeah, there is the liability issues, as Chuck mentioned, but we'd have that either way for a municipal utility. But I'll let you answer that first.
Yeah, you bet. So there's actually a resolution that we'll talk about after this that integrates the two. So what is nice about the SEU is we don't actually need a feasibility study because the technical report answered most of those questions. What we need is a rate analysis. And so if we were going to go out and do a feasibility study, those firms, I would hope, qualified firms do rate analysis as part of that. And so we would ask them to do the rate analysis. And we simultaneously would be doing the wait list because the rate could be influenced by how many people are ready to subscribe to the system.
Okay, my next question is about the landfill solar partnership that we're thinking about. Are we assuming this is going to kill that deal? Also, that's land we might also potentially be able to use for in the future if we do the SEU. So I'm just wondering how that plays into things.
No, landfill solar is regulatory. I mean, we have to move forward on that project. Both parties have to agree to terminate it. And this is one of those projects to me that's about getting emissions down fast. And so that project is moving, and we might actually be breaking ground in 2022 on a 20 megawatt install in our community. That's next year. And so we wouldn't preclude the option of eventually acquiring it as part of the SEU when we stand up to the community solar phase and we put up the poles and the wires and we buy that and we use that as part of the system. But we don't have to. We can still get that project moving. We'll know more shortly about whether or not that's economically viable. Doesn't kill the project.
But DTE can't kill the project on their own, is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay. And then are we allowed, I don't remember from the previous presentations, if we start this up, would we be bound by the city limits in terms of customers? Could we go outside?
Yeah,
the
good
city?
question. Yeah. So that's right. So we have a franchise as the city of Ann Arbor, and that's what allows us to do this is because our franchise is non-exclusive. That said, I will tell you, I'm in conversations with many people in the area about how they could explore their own SEU, but we might be able to do customer service together or billing together or contract work together. And so there's some gray.
Because currently we sell water to people outside the city. So in theory, we have a connection that we could maybe leverage in the future to cooperate with surrounding communities.
This may be outside of, you might know better than I do, and I will go to our attorneys, but what I have been advised so far is that it's a really big, it's because it's through the franchise, it's what the boundary of the franchise is.
No, I mean, legally, yeah, they're separate kind of things. I just meant if in the future, like you said, we could cooperate maybe with another SEU for Pittsfield Township, for example, or whatever, then we'd already have the billing mechanism set up for outside communities. But Anyway, I think maybe when you're talking about the newer information you got from Google, how does that compare in terms of like the peak in the solar, excuse me, the peak in winter versus like, I'm sorry, the peak in the summer, whereas in the winter we're getting a lot less, obviously. Do we have information on that?
I do, and I'm happy to share it. I don't have it at my fingertips right
Gotcha.
now. Yeah, apologies.
Okay, thanks. I'll let other people speak up.
Commissioner McCoy, do you have another question?
Yeah, I think one of them might have been just what Noah asked. I was wondering if you could share the like analysis around the solar increases that you found, or like where there could be places, and like Noah said, I'd be interested in seeing if it talks about winter versus summer. And I mean, I think it's also helpful and interesting to know that it's just for rooftop solar. I mean, one question I have that maybe goes beyond this conversation and is maybe more for city council is I think there's an ordinance like that prevents like ground solar.
Front yard.
I'm wondering if, sorry, what'd you say, Miss?
It's just front yard.
Front yard. Oh, okay. It's just front yard. So I just wonder if there's also like considerations of thinking about if there's other down the line, if there's other city ordinance that might need to be changed to like even increase that number more as we consider different potentials.
Can I piggyback on that real quickly, Missy? Are there HOAs in Ann Arbor that might limit that? I assume that there are, and that might be something that we should also just note
That one.
that we analyze at some point.
Yeah. Ember, really great. Commissioner McCoy, really great point about front yard solar. And I think that's something we've talked about as staff in kind of things we want to bring to council anyway for reconsideration. Sorry, council members, it's coming. And then for the HOAs, this is actually something we've been working with our state representative on, because HOAs can ban solar. They can also ban other sustainability things like line dryers outside close to hang your drying out. And that's just kind of counter to what we're trying to do broadly. So we've been working with them on some legislation. And last time I checked in with Representative Robbie, I mean, it's drafted. I think he's just waiting to introduce it.
Commissioner Kerber and then Commissioner Briggs.
Yes, just as a practical way of understanding what this would mean to a business that has a very large roof, a roof that's capable of supporting more than just their current load. So if they focus on just offsetting their current load by building out a system, they get the investment tax credit, they get depreciation and so forth. And they can sell the excess over generation to basically to the grid. In this scenario, what would be the value proposition for the SEU coming to that same small business and convincing them to build out 100% of their capacity when they're only going to be using half? What's the incentive for them to do that? Does that make sense?
So yeah, absolutely. And if I fully understand your question, one would be they're not building out their roof, right? The SEU is, so they don't have to lay out that capital at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then they pay back on their usage based on kilowatt hour usage. So I guess the incentive for them is hopefully more reliable, sustainable power that they get with some battery storage on site. And then they get to be in the green business space. The value for the SEU is we get to leverage that extra roof space to generate more power to go to their neighbor or wherever else we may need to move it.
Well, I see the value for the SEU for sure. I'm just really trying to understand what it is for the small business person, as opposed to taking the value for themselves to giving it up to you.
We would be, I think the honest answer is if they can take it themselves and already have, we would want them to. I mean, that's absolutely fine. And then excess generation would come to the SEU. The kick I could see in that model is it won't make economic sense for them to overgenerate much. Unless I'm wrong.
DT, you would not allow them to overgenerate much.
Right, but if they were paying outright for the install, for example, I think the economics sort of break for them as an individual to generate 200% if their roof was capable of doing that, whereas that the SEU could and would want us to maximize that generation. So I think that needs to be further kind of explored, how to make that value proposition really clear. Thanks for naming it. But the intent would be to maximize if we can and help more commercial enterprises, small businesses take advantage of renewable energy that just can't pay the upfront cost today.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Briggs.
Yeah, on the HOA discussion, I just wanted to let you know, Missy, that might be Attorney McDonald is actually, I've been having conversations with him about HOAs recently. That's come up on a different issue. And I had a little bit on we should move slowly on this, but maybe we should actually be thinking about it a little more quickly. And then on the discussion of kind of what Ember suggested, I think it is probably useful to be doing a brainstorming session on how, what types of other ordinances this might, we might be wanting to think about, or where we might see policies that might challenge each other. For example, there's certainly a lot of interest, I think, right now to realize some of the benefits of increased density in our community to get more folks living here. And yet, as we densify a little bit, I can imagine that there could be some impacts on solar access. And so what does that mean for our community? Might be something worth exploring.
Commissioner McCumber.
Thanks. This is definitely an exciting opportunity. Missy, you mentioned that having done some modeling around solar potential and for generating energy. I was wondering if any modeling had been around for the energy efficiency piece, what kind of potential for reducing demand is in that part of this equation?
Yeah, so we did, well, great, thank you for asking that question, because I think that often falls off of people's minds when you think about generation. So we took existing household bills, we picked like representative different houses, looked at their bills, looked at their energy audits, and kind of came up with some estimates. We did, I'll pull up the model in the background, but I believe we projected a 25% reduction potential through the kinds of improvements we're talking about. And it is different for different types of houses. So I'll go look at that in the background as we move into the next phase of conversation. And I'm happy to share the specifics with you. But we know we have significant energy waste reduction potential in many of our older homes. Most of our homes are older homes in Ann Arbor. So we have a lot of potential.
Did that include commercial space as well? Are you, because I don't know square footage wise how residential square footage compares to business. Are you guessing 25% reduction potential for commercial buildings?
I don't have that number on top of my head right now. What we did, we've been working pretty closely with the 2030 district, who's doing all of these energy audits in commercial spaces and kind of stratifying those based on what we have as potential in restaurants versus office space. And so we're going to take that kind of nuance to really figure out potential across the different markets. Whereas residential is a little bit easier. There aren't as many categories to kind of bifurcate.
Do we have any idea what percentage of residential buildings have been maximized from an energy efficiency standpoint?
Oh, I can't imagine it's high based on what we see. I don't have a number for you, but I don't even think we're at 1%.
I don't think we have a good way of collecting that
Yeah.
information right now, but this would be something that potentially the SEU could collect.
Well, and the other work we're doing, the benchmarking, that past council will help us with commercial and multifamily sites really understand where we have high performers and where we have potential. If the home energy label goes through, that's going to give us a sense of not a sense, it's going to give us actual data about how our residential units are performing. So we will get that information to be much more strategic in kind of how we intervene in the market.
Yeah, that'll give us a good sampling that we can look by neighborhood and get a better estimate of by neighborhood, what kind of potential there is. So I agree. Can I just mention with the 2030 district, my recollection is that they're targeting a 15%, 50% reduction in energy use by 2030, if I'm not mistaken. It's a very, very aggressive target. But I think what Missy is saying, there is a lot of potential, both between residential, multifamily, and commercial for energy efficiency. I would add, if you think of that pie that we saw at the beginning, if you were to save somewhere between 25 to 50% of that, but then took the natural gas part and took the transportation part and electrify all of that, that's a huge amount that we still have to power. So we still have to hope for, a lot of other good things to fall into line. Bridget, did you have something else to add to?
Well, just one other follow-up question to that. So for somebody who doesn't have solar potential in their house, but could do a lot of energy efficiency work, the way it would work through an SEU, it sounds like it would almost be like a PACE program meets Michigan Saves. So that they would be, if they joined the SEU and got the energy efficiency work done, they'd be paying a certain amount of money every month. And I guess everybody is hoping that for that homeowner, the amount of money they're paying every month would equal the money that they're saving on their energy bill. Is that?
Yeah, so it would be like our PACE, like residential PACE.
Right.
I think that is one way to think about on-bill finance. The other sort of thinking, yeah, that's the goal, Commissioner Rocover, right? Is that like people either have savings from what they pay, even with those improvements, or kind of lock in, but we would be able to, we would be working with the homeowner to model their options and put together the right package for them. We can't, we can't force them to make other choices. We wouldn't want to do that. We'd really want to customize to, some people may want to do it all and are okay with a slight premium. Others may need the savings immediately. And so we're really going to focus on what has the most savings potential up front.
Thanks.
Sure, Cleve.
To that point about the savings, I worked with a lot of contractors, and indeed the one that worked with my house, I did energy efficiency on that and financed that through Michigan Saves. It's fairly standard practice now for reputable contractors when they go in with a Michigan Saves loan, that in order to get the loan through Michigan Saves, they actually have to show how the energy savings will meet the loan payments on a monthly basis, or at least on an annual basis. So that analysis is done, and the state, that's pretty much state of the art. So I assume the city would follow a similar protocol in a project. Michigan Saves could be the partner on this kind of a program as well. So there's as I say, this is standard practice, and indeed on solar installations as well. It's the same question. Well, if you're going to borrow money, does the solar system generate sufficient output to pay off the loan payment on an annual basis? And if the answer is no, then the lender, Michigan Saves, slams the brakes on. So I think that's good. That's the good news.
Bridget, do you have another question again? Okay, good. Anyone else? I had a few thoughts I wanted to share. First of all, thanks for everybody's great questions. You had a lot of questions that I didn't think about, and I really appreciate everybody illuminating the discussion. Lots of details and maybe a few devils in some of them. One question I have, Missy, is, and maybe it's just something that also, like a few others you had to note down, is how do we structure an SEU so that it is also socially and environmentally just in terms of who it serves, in what order it serves them. And I can imagine, if you get $100,000 or $10 million, and you get a list of people, and a bunch of people on commissions and city council say, "Oh, we're interested in doing this," and typically we're people of privilege. How do you then determine who gets in the front of the line, who gets in the back of the line? And these things become then potentially very political. I'm wondering if you've thought about that at all.
Yeah, and the answer is simple and complicated. One is who we choose to reach out to, really targeted, right? So there's already people on a wait list. We already have a wait list going of folks that have demonstrated interest, but who do we spend time with, and who do we knock, and whose community are we in? And that is where I think we can really focus on the economic and social justice aspects of the work. Also, we're creating something, so we can create it with the tenets that we hold and the values that we hold. More complicated, though, is the political question, and that is hard. It's hard. I don't have the answer to that, and I think that's something we're going to have to discuss kind of more broadly. That one thing I'll sort of name that I think about is what happens if I center a large area of low-income folks and it's not in a council ward. It's in someone else's ward. What does that mean for how the SEU functions and how we support it? And that's a real question that I don't have an answer to. And I think I need to have guidance from, our elected leaders, from our community, about how we want this to really look and roll out.
And then I have one last question for you and maybe for Chuck. And that is with regards to reliability and resiliency, to really have a high level of both. It seems to me we're going to have a lot of additional wires connecting homes in Ann Arbor. Isn't that not true? I don't know if Chuck is there, but it seems to me, if we're talking about connecting rooftops and batteries and on individual residences, on carports, et cetera, on commercial entities, and then providing resiliency by connecting all those together, then in effect, at some point, we almost have a redundant set of connections between structures in the city, do we not?
Technically, there's a risk, and the risk is related to how power flows. And again, I'll get into the electrons and voltage and power quality. That's where you're going to find problems. You're going to find stray currents, and you're going to find outages that cause other outages and cascading events. So the devil's in the details, John. If it's laid out right, we could probably mitigate a lot of that, but it has to be laid out right. And there's cost to make sure that we provide that reliability to our ultimate customers, if that's the route that's taken.
Yeah, and just picking up on that, I think obviously Chuck knows way more about the mechanics here, but part of what we need to do in the microgrid study and why that's something we want to move forward with is we know the neighborhoods. I know the neighborhoods where I want to start this work and where, from an environmental justice standpoint, we've already been engaging and working. And so we can look at that neighborhood very specifically and say, can we underground? What kind of wires? How many wires? How much connection? How many poles? And get the specifics. And yeah, there will be some redundant infrastructure, but it'll be limited in terms of that redundancy to what we actually need. And that's what we need to answer in kind of the next phase of the work.
Okay. So
and by the way, don't hold your breath, John, too long. We'll have wireless power before you can blink.
That would be wonderful. So we have another significant part of our agenda that I'd like to move on to, and that is the resolution in front of us. I'm going to turn things over to Missy in a second, but I just have a few comments that I'd like to make as chair. First of all, I want to thank all the people that have been coming to meetings, watching them, listening them, and also providing public input. I think it's helped us better gauge sentiment in the community, as well as understand what some of the issues are. And I really want to say thank you very much for everybody that's done that. Also, we've had really some excellent presentations, including Missy's tonight, and in commission meetings, but out of this meeting, there was a really good presentation that Missy and her team did in a public forum. And so I think that's really helped illuminate our discussions tonight and then going forward for the rest of the evening. And we now have a resolution in front of us with another resolution from City Council that has asked us to weigh in on a feasibility study by the end of the year. And I just have a couple of requests as we go into the discussion. And I think this is just a continuation of the way we've conducted ourselves up until now. And I'm really proud of the commission. I want all of us to be open-minded. I hope that we continue to, as someone smarter than I or wiser than I said, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And another thing is I'm hoping also that we can work towards a win-win solution. I think we see that that's a convergence that we've had here in the last weeks and months, and I definitely hope that we can continue on that path so that we really do end up something, because I think everybody that's in this group, as well as people that have been calling in, as well as following it, really have the same goals, the same passion, and I think that can hopefully lead us to a good conclusion. So our objective tonight is to hopefully either tonight or at the latest in our December meeting, finalize a resolution. I guess we could say we aren't going to vote on any resolution or approve any resolution. That's an option too. I have a sense that we're coalescing around a resolution. We have obviously tonight some time. We also have time in our December meeting if we need it. And I would just ask people to consider, as we enter into this discussion, that we have sort of two competing objectives, if you will. And one is that we would like all of this to move forward with speed. On the other hand, I think we want a precise resolution that really gives City Council direction on what to do with the feasibility study. And if we recommend a feasibility study, what's considered in that feasibility study. So we can discuss this very, very quickly and move forward quickly, but then we have the risk of leaving things out of the resolution that we may regret later on. So I think we'll all have a sense of that as the evening goes on, and then we can decide another hour or so from now how we want to bring this to a resolution. Do we vote on a final resolution tonight, or do we want to do some additional crafting, taking into consideration people's comments tonight, and take a vote in the December meeting where we lose a month, but as I said, maybe we gain some precision in the wording of the resolution that we all feel is really important. So Missy, I'm going to ask you to introduce the resolution. I asked Missy if she would do that because we're actually considering a slightly different resolution than what we considered and had a first reading on in our July 13th meeting. And so I wanted to have Missy talk a little bit about what took us to where we are today, and then maybe we can pull the resolution up and discuss it, have questions, make proposals for wording changes, etc. How does that sound with everybody? Great.
John, I have a question. Don't we need to make a motion before we move to the discussion phase? Because we have a new resolution in front of us. It's not the other one.
Yeah, so Missy, why don't you introduce it, and then we'll take a motion and get a second to consider it,
Yes.
and then we'll open it for discussion. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to start off, I also want to thank Commissioner Clevey and Commissioner McCoy, who worked really hard on this behind the scenes, and to all of you that sent comments in over the preceding few weeks. So what is before us is a resolution that marries a number of things. It marries the ask that we've received to do a feasibility study for a traditional municipal utility. It marries next steps for a sustainable energy utility that was on that last slide that I shared. And it brings in an options analysis, which is something a number of commissioners have asked for, which is understanding more than just those, in particular, the traditional utility, kind of understanding the pros and the cons of other approaches, primarily when we get towards things like the rate analysis and what it would cost to do that work. I recognize this is a lot to process. We really tried to kind of harmonize those three different asks. And so I'll pull up the resolution. It is different in form. Also, just adding, we did clarify what would be in a feasibility study. So the original resolution, we had asked for a feasibility study, and I think thanks to folks like Commissioner McCoy, we really added more clarity so that it helps with, for example, should this move forward, the drafting of an RFP. So let me, oh boy, I'm gonna end up sharing my whole screen. Don't judge me if that happens. Let's see. Can you see the feasibility study, the resolved clauses? The resolution?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, we can.
great. So high level, I'm not going to read these. The first resolve clause focuses on the traditional utility feasibility study, and this is where we add more description of what we would expect to see. I would say this isn't exclusive, but these were the kinds of things we would want to see in an actual study itself. So this has been added, and I think I will turn that to Commissioner McCoy to tell me if it changes the spirit of anything, but I don't think it changes the spirit of the initial resolution, but instead provides clarity to it. The second was the pathways analysis that some folks have asked for on the commission, kind of understanding how does the purchase of an existing IOU infrastructure, traditional feasibility or traditional municipalization compare to these other options that we've sort of been exploring broadly. The third resolve clause then says that if any other options are analyzed, they have to go through kind of a similar economic and technical feasibility study to what we outline for the traditional utility to the extent that's possible. The fourth resolve clause says that this is kind of like our filter on the study, that anything analyzed, we want to understand how it aligns with, of course, 820, equity, sustainability, transformation, and those energy criteria and principles, since we've decided and adopted those as core elements of our decision-making process. We want to be able to kind of look at them through very parallel lenses. And then, of course, we want this to be done, this is the fifth, I think, resolved, by a qualified firm. Of course, we all want that to happen using kind of best practices in case we've missed something and the field has evolved since other studies have been done. And then the last resolve clause that actually is about the SEU, and it says simultaneous with the above, we want to move forward exploring the governance structure, the staffing, registering public interest, starting with a technical study for the nano and microgrids, and drafting the ordinance of just starting that process to actually create an SEU. Doesn't mean adopt it, but to start that work. So it marries a lot of things and was a Herculean attempt, perhaps, by many, many people to try to bridge a lot of great comments you've had. So I'll stop there.
So thanks, Missy. Can I get a motion to consider the resolution in a second, and then we'll open it up for discussions and comments.
So moved.
Second.
A bunch of firsts and seconds. I think first was Commissioner McCoy, and then Commissioner Garcia, and then a bunch of other ones after that. So thanks. I have, as we open it up, I have two things that I'd like to mention that are really just minor grammatical things, just so we get those out of the way.
I might have caught them, Chair.
Okay.
But go for it. Yeah. Okay. Tell me what they are.
1, 2, 3, 4. In the fifth whereas, where we talk about DTE, instead of saying who, I think we need to say which,
okay,
because it's not a person. And then my green power is capital M, capital I, and then green power when we refer to that further down. Those are the only two changes of that nature that I saw. So I'll open it up then to everyone else for other kinds of comments and proposals, etc. So first, Commissioner McCoy.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so as Missy and Jen said too, I think, this goes back to Noah's question earlier, like part of the goal of this new resolution was understanding that like the SEU can be a step towards full municipalization depending on the feasibility study, and also like just the ability to do this through one resolution to start working on the SEU now while we consider other options that will take a little more time to weigh. One thing with the new resolution that I personally feel should not be in it is the second resolve clause looking at the pathways option. I feel that way because I'm worried that adding this whole feasibility analysis of all these other options, some of which we haven't even discussed as a body yet, like Michigan Green Power, Missy said that's potentially on the docket for future times earlier in the meeting, but we haven't really had a large conversation about it yet. So I'm worried that having that clause could make the feasibility study take significantly longer and also cost a lot more money than we originally had estimated when we were considering a feasibility study. And instead, I would recommend to just replace it with a resolve clause that asks the study to include a preliminary rate analysis for the sustainable electric utility. Missy said earlier in the meeting that the SEU doesn't need a feasibility study, which is what that second resolve clause would do, that really we just need a rate analysis. So I think we should replace that clause with something along those lines and really focus this study on the SEU and municipalization. And then if we want to pass something that's looking at other options as well, we should do that in a separate resolution. And I also feel that way because I feel that clause also kind of pits them against each other. It wants us to weigh the options in compared to one another, which I think a lot of us agree that in the end, we're going to need a lot of these options working together. And so I don't think a study that compares them to each other is actually what we want or helpful. I think we want a study that can compare specifically the municipal electric utility and to how like DTE, our current main power provider would be, not these other options that could be components of it.
Thank you. Can I reframe part of that and ask for an explanation from Missy or anybody else that's with us? And that is, if I look at the second resolved clause, a VPPA and My Green Power, are they not both options available under a municipal, either form of municipal utility? They would be open to the SEU as they would be open to municipalization through condemnation. So if we look at that list in taking at least those two, do they need to be called out? Because essentially they are a subset of the options available to both. Is that correct or incorrect?
They're also an and, like, or I'm sorry, not an and, they're an or, that we could choose those pathways instead of other pathways or in addition to other pathways. So we could do a VPPA right now without having a utility.
Okay.
We can't do a PPA, but we could do a VPPA.
Right. And My Green Power individuals could do, but the city on behalf of individuals could. I mean, I'm just wondering, if we look at that list, just to shorten it down and be more precise, do we cut out My Green Power because it frankly isn't something we could do now, but it could be done either under municipalization through condemnation or through an SEU?
Maybe. I mean, if we take DT's infrastructure, we're not enrolling in DT's program.
Well,
this is perhaps part of the intent, and I did not add this, so I will leave the floor open for the commissioners who did recommend this change.
Right.
That I think there's some nuance to this question that needs to be explored about what that would look like.
Okay, maybe we note that as an open point. Can I also ask, while we're on that same topic, CCA, could someone, and frankly, I think I was in musings in my own head and then talking with other people, I thought it's something maybe should be on the list, but I'm wondering, what is a feasibility study going to tell us about CCA, given it's not legal and we don't know the pathway to a CCA, other than what do we expect to learn more about through the feasibility study, other than what we know what the political pathway is?
Parallel statement that this was something that came from the commission, so I would welcome commissioners sharing their thoughts. One would be, I could imagine a use case of understanding pricing in CCAs that are like us, or going to the market to get a sense. So if it were enabled, we could at least have a discussion about how hard we want to push for that kind of legislation, and maybe have more information to go to our legislators about why. But again, I want to just, that's my thinking on something that was added by some other folks.
Okay, no, I think that's a good point. I mean, in the end, a lot of this comes down to economics, and if that illuminates, if the economics under that illuminate the economics with the other options, that's an important input. Okay, sorry for interrupting. We got a bunch of other commissioners lined up here. Carlene.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm also going to be asking a question about the Resolved 2 clause, as well as how it connects to Resolve 3 clause and the final clause, which is the sixth clause. So the sixth clause, which states that the Energy Commission recommends that simultaneous with the above action, the city continue investigating the creation of a sustainable energy utility by, and then it lists the different approaches. What would be different from this versus studying pathways to meet, or what's proposed in Resolve Clause number 2? It seems to me that we would look at how much it would cost to do the things that Resolve Clause number 6 is instructing council to initiate right away. So we would be studying how much it's going to cost while doing it at the same time. Kind of having a hard time articulating the question. Does
I
it
think
make
I
sense?
understand. If I understood you correct, or the essence of the question, it's really kind of what are we asking for the SEU, because it's in its own kind of separate resolve clause. So why is it also in 2? And that was because the rate analysis is the part that we need. We don't really need any of the other kind of assessments, but we do want help. A firm that was doing kind of this assessment should be qualified to do a rate assessment for the SEU.
Okay. So then possibly then it would be, my suggestion would be to specify doing a rate analysis then for the SEU in the second resolve clause.
Or adding it to the list in the 6th.
Yeah, I'll just jump into it. That's why I suggested, like, you know, both John's comments and Carlene's comments are why I suggest taking out the second resolve clause and just replacing it with a resolve clause that explicitly states asking for a rate analysis for an SEU and not including these other options that might not make sense for a feasibility study.
Okay, that was pretty much my question. It seemed a little bit redundant. Thanks.
Commissioner Hook, I'm sorry, I was on mute.
Yep. So thanks, Missy, for presenting this. I really think as a body, we really need to revisit this idea, though, in terms of combining lots of thoughts and moving parts here. We've got the SEU that Missy presented. We know it's structurally different than a CCA, or that it's different than a municipality. We also still have the DTE option, which I'll just say on the table is our base point, right? And I always think about, somebody raised the Stephen Covey point earlier today. One of my favorites is begin with the end in mind. What are we going to try to accomplish here? Are we going to try to recommend that the city do something different at the end of the day than where we're at today? And I think that's the case. I think it would be foolish for us to spend a lot of time writing resolutions that don't result in that. But I think we need to be mindful of what is that finish line? What are we trying to accomplish, and how do we best get there? People have identified speed as critical. I think quality is equally critical, and making sure that what we produce is sound, that we don't recommend option A and option B is the one we should have picked. How do we avoid that from happening if we don't study the options? CCA is out there. We can do a high-level screening if we want to see whether it holds muster, and feel comfortable that the decision we make relative to the other options allows us to say the CCA is not going to work. And we have legal issues. We know that. We've heard that. I'm aware of them. I've worked with CCAs in California. I know how they operate. What I'm getting to is I think we really need to distill this resolution into two parts. I think we need to focus one resolution on an SEU. It sounds like we don't need a lot of funding for it. It sounds like we don't need any kind of a council recommendation or transition. We don't need a feasibility study per se paid by a third-party consultant because we've already had some folks look at it. But it's a totally different set of pathway. It's a different set of people. It's a different set of responsibilities. It's got a different budget. So I mentioned it's probably got a different schedule. It really belongs on its own. And this resolution we've been talking about since March or whenever we brought this up as far as the municipality really should stand on its own because it's going to need funding. And we're going to have to find a pathway to get to that funding and make sure the scope for it is appropriate. That's not going to be an overnight process, and we know how long it takes the city to fund things like this. So this is not a slam dunk, and I don't want to wait and stall the SEU activity, waiting to figure out if we can even do this municipality study. Let's get moving, and let's transition from a large, pretty complicated, lots of resolution engagement to very crisp written resolutions that focus that. One on a municipality, one on the MSEU. The municipality really needs to hold its muster against the other options. It can be done in parallel to the SEU, but at some point, we need to sit down and figure out, is the SEU the right approach, or is there an option coming out of the study made by others that looks better and is a better solution for the city? And I'm afraid until we really understand that and get on a pathway that gets to that date, let's say it's May 1, 2022 that we make a decision. We need to set that end date and understand what it looks like and how we're going to get there. And I don't think adding them both together in the same body of a resolution works for me. You know, I could step back and provide technical comments to the resolution as written. It's a lot of effort, I think, to get to the finish line with this. It's really the first reading of it tonight. And I prefer that we think about splitting it into two parts. And I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Do people want to discuss that, or do we want to move on to the next question? How do people want to handle that? I sort of prefer talking about a topic and resolving that before we move on to the next topic. I see a few nods. So I'm gonna address Chuck's at least topic of two resolutions versus one, and I wonder what the practical benefit is of going back and having a whole bunch of whereas clauses that are going to be the same, and having a resolve clause in one resolution and then another bunch of resolve clauses that are different in a second resolution, rather than simply having two different resolve clauses that define exactly what we want all in the same resolution as we have in front of us right now. I don't see the benefit of splitting it. Can somebody else or Chuck speak to that? Commissioner Briggs or Councilmember Briggs, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Commissioner Cookham is saying in terms of just we're sort of bringing together these are two different paths, or maybe not two different paths, but they're two different concepts or multiple different concepts that are being brought together in one resolution. But we're having this conversation simultaneously in our community. And so I think that there's a fair amount of benefit in just going to council, because the council discussion is going to likely address all of these different issues at once. It's nice to actually have had a resolution that kind of does that and have the recommendation of Energy Commission all at once saying, you know, this is what we support, the path that we support. And it may be, you know, because they're broken up into different resolve clauses, I think it provides the opportunity to say, okay, the SEU can get moving, you know, hopefully the feasibility study, if this moves forward, can get going, but they're not necessarily time dependent upon each other. I do think you want to make sure that they don't we don't slow down on one because, or you don't need to. I guess those are my general thoughts.
Do other people have comments on this before we move on?
I do, John. I think that I guess I understand what Chuck's concern is. I don't think I would be in favor of breaking it up either. So let's say we have this document, I think covers what we need to have done to move forward to, finding a pathway to getting A20 completed and getting carbon neutral by 2030. This is the energy generation side, and I think we need to do a bunch of these things. So I guess I wouldn't support that. I also have a comment about the resolve thing that started this. I can come back around, or I can do that now.
No, go ahead.
So I think I'm in favor of us looking at the options that we have before us, because I don't see, of the 41 utilities, municipal utilities that are out there and the models that we have, that any of them meet the goals that we're trying to achieve. And if you look at the history of them, most of them were done because there wasn't service available to them, or it was an economic consideration. But in large part, the decision was financial. We're looking at an emissions-based decision tree here, trying to figure out how we can, zero out our emissions at the same time, maintain levels of prosperity and all the other things that we're doing. So to narrow this down to, well, we're only going to look at two options, I think hurts us. I think we need to look at how the options fit together. So I'll just use myself as an example. I have solar panels on my house, but I don't generate sufficient energy because of my poor site to be able to meet 100% of my electrical needs. So I meet the rest of my green needs by buying power through my green power. So between the combination of my green power and my solar systems, I get 100%. I think we're going to need to understand all of these options, how they fit together. At some point, we may want to, we got a 20 megawatt solar system up the street we're putting in. Boulder, Colorado showed us one thing, that as you start moving down this track, you get more leverage. And perhaps we could induce DTE to offer that to us through their My Green Power at a reasonable and competitive discount that would meet our needs at some point, or buy it outright or whatever. But to say we don't need to look at anything but these two options, traditional municipalization and SEU, and that's it, I think we're cutting off our nose to spider face. There's movement on community choice aggregation. There's movement on that last week. There's movement on how we would do if we would need power purchase agreements or virtual power agreements. If DTE throws up a bunch of barriers, virtual power is an issue. We're going to have to understand this, and it's part of the cost. So to me, I think we're saying here, we need to look at A20 energy-related emission reduction and clean energy goals. That should be driving this. And these are the options that we have in front of us. Traditional municipal, SEU, but all these other things are out there as well, My Green Power and stuff. We need to be able to unleash the innovation side of this program and let us come up with the optimum mix of these things. So I'm not in favor of saying, oh, we're not going to look at these other things because it'll slow it down. I'm with Chuck. I think we need to be thorough. And if next week something happens on community choice aggregation that changes this thing a bit, I would be really mad if we say, well, we're not going to look at that. We're just going to go as fast as we can on this other model because we've agreed to that and we limited ourselves. I'm not for limiting. In fact, I'd be open to saying, the combination of these and other options that impact us in the future. I would expect that Missy and her team would look at all options and leave no stone unturned. So I appreciate the drive to make this as simple as possible and get it done so we can hit the deadline, which for the election in November. But that's not my limitation. My limitation is A20. That's what I think should be driving us. Thank you.
I think Councilmember Adina was next, and then Edie, you're right after.
Thank you, Chair Mirsky. I'm going to follow that up by agreeing almost entirely with Commissioner Clevey and in part with Commissioner Hookham, although I also wouldn't support separating this out. As I read, and I welcome kind of other commissioners' thoughts because it seems that others maybe are interpreting this differently. But as I read that second resolved clause, I took it as exactly what Commissioner Clevey was suggesting, which was that this is a complicated issue, and there are likely going to be multiple solutions that we need to undertake in order to achieve our A20 goals. It's not just going to be one that solves all of our problems. And so what I'm looking for in particular, as I look at kind of the second half of that first resolve clause, what our goals are in undertaking this feasibility study with an emphasis on the cost to power the utility with 100% renewable energy, the assessment of the quality of those assets and to repair and replace, all of those things. What we may come back with is a recommendation that there is a combination of these things that gets us there. And I think that's what that final phrase there in the second resolved clause emphasizes for me, is we are truly interested in getting an answer on what is the best solution for Ann Arbor to get to 100% renewable and decarbonization by 2030. That should be the primary focus of what our work is and what is driving this work. And so I think that's the important part for me. If I'm trying not to come at this with an assumption of what the outcome of this feasibility study will be. And in order to do that, I want to make sure that we're exploring all of our options, but also centering that in our goal, this body's goal, the city's charge as laid out in the A20 plan that was adopted, is not moving us towards publicly owned power. While that may be a positive outcome of this work, the primary responsibility that we've established for ourselves is renewable energy and decarbonization by 2030. And while I don't think those things have to be mutually exclusive, in this case, I think it's important for us to emphasize that it could be an all of the above approach, and we should not put all of our eggs in one basket.
Thank you. Commissioner Juneau.
Thank you. Yeah, I have kind of three main points following up a lot on what Mark said as well. I think the first is, right, if we're undertaking a feasibility study, the marginal costs of adding on the different things it just seems like a better use of our funds. And I don't think, especially when we're just looking with the CCA at mostly the legal aspects and with the SEU at the ratepayer question or the rate analysis, I just don't think it's going to be double or triple, right? It's going to be a lesser investment. My second point is that I think that there's something to be said as well for presenting these in the same report and in the same resolution. With regard to public knowledge, public awareness, public understanding of these issues, I think that it could be a disservice to separate them out and expect that a lot of residents are going to have the time and capacity to really fully dive into these multi-page reports, right? I think this is a public good when we can offer and make this clear for folks to understand. And I think the last point I'd say, I'm very sensitive though as well to Ember's point about we don't want to pose these as opposites. And I think that that's probably a question that can be addressed within the framing of the report at the discretion of our contractors or whoever's working on the report as well, right? And they might also have, the ability to address some of the other questions about My Green Power, VPPAs. They don't have to put it all on the same plane. Those can be shown as kind of, supplementary aspects rather than a main pathway per se. So I just think that we do have some discretion probably that would happen anyway with, any experienced person undertaking this sort of analysis. So just wanted to raise those points.
Thanks very much. Commissioner Hookham.
Well, I'm not getting much support for my splitting, so I won't bark at you all about that, although I may sway my vote a little bit later. But I think a couple things missing in the current resolution, if we focus it on singular, it doesn't really talk much about authority. Who makes decisions, who controls budgets, who manages the effort, who gets the results, who interprets the results, who makes recommendations to the city council. There's a lot of authority / accountability / implementation that I think we need to put in here. It can be done without 4,000 10,000 words and accomplish what I'm trying to state. So I think that's really critical that we add some element of that in here. There's some language in here about how OSI and Energy Commission are going to work together. That should be the fundamental. I think if we don't do that, we'll miss out on providing a valid recommendation. We talked a lot about one size doesn't fit all. We may need to look at multiple steps here on what solution fits the bill. I will tell you, I've been working with Michigan Council on Climate Solutions. There's state-related activity on how do we solve the whole climate issue. But as a state, there are solutions that are going to come out of that potentially may disrupt anything the city's doing. A classic example might be if you look at the offshore wind study that was done a number of years ago by Michigan State that I was participated in. We could generate all the energy we need in Michigan with offshore wind and forget about local solar if we really wanted to. That may be the cheapest alternative low-cost carbon solution. And how does that fit into the structure of a municipality that we would own and operate? Or how might that work with an SCU? Would we buy power from somebody that's generating offshore? We don't want to shut off the future because the future may have quite a bit of different look than it does today. And I think us as a little community, it's ambitious for us to do this. We're leading the rest of the state, right, as far as what we're looking to do. We want to start a movement. We want to start activity, but I don't want to get ahead of the cart here. I want the horse leading the cart, and I want to be sure we're riding the right horse. And we're up against this time clock, so we need to think thoroughly. But let's not overlook how we're going to do this and who's going to be accountable for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jen, can I just respond to that really quickly?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of really good sentiment in what Chuck shared, but I do think I have to sort of reiterate that the Energy Commission is an advisory commission to council, and that is sort of the role. It's very clearly in the charter, and I think that we should be doing this collaboratively. But I think that is. I just feel like we have to reiterate that there is a professional staff that will do this work with council, and the commission is an advisory commission to help make strategic decisions and give information to council.
Well taken. I think just to combine those 2 points and to leverage off of or to jump off of Chuck, we can always weigh in on staff's analysis of the report. That's something we can still do. But I think Missy's point is we advise, and staff is going to be the primary entity which evaluates the feasibility study and comments on it. That's my interpretation as well. Commissioner McCoy and then Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and sorry, Chuck. I agree. I think that they should remain in the same resolution. And I also think that, like, you know, I think your concerns are valid about like not wanting anything to hold up any one other thing. But I that's also why I appreciate like part of the resolution around the SEU is saying specifically, you know, to urge city council to, you know, start looking into these other components that they can right now. So I think we can also consider that what we're asking for in one resolution also might come out in different places when city council like takes it from us as well. And I think Erica made those points as well. But I think, you know, having similar issues talked about for us in one place is helpful. I appreciate all of what all of you said, a lot of you said about, you know, wanting to make sure we have a thorough analysis that looks at all of our different options. And like I said at the beginning too, I think a lot of these different things are very likely components of each other. And I think looking at different pathways is important. I just wonder if what is posed in this resolution gets away from what like a feasibility study is and what it's needed for a municipal electric utility, and gets more towards like a desirability analysis. You know, like the goals of a municipal feasibility study are to look at these like very specific things, some of which are laid out in the resolve clause prior, you know, being able to look at the legal analysis, looking at the cost of acquiring the wires, like, you know, if we're able to do that down the line. And it's not necessarily coming into like choosing that as the option still. So I feel like that's where my concerns still lie in that second resolve clause, is that it moves away from a feasibility study in that sense, in that I think we do need to figure out how these different pieces are components of a potential, traditional utility of the future, if you will, right? Like Mark says, there's not one like even what we're proposing here, but how it moves away from like the technical needs of a feasibility study for a municipal utility. And if looking at this multiple pathways approach and looking at these higher analysis of, Michigan Green Power community choice aggregation is like something that we don't want to be saying is a part of this feasibility study, if that makes sense. And so I wonder how the wording, even could be changed to like rethink that, if not removed entirely.
Thanks. Have a number of others, and I'd like to maybe jump in after Edie. So Noah, Mark, Edie, Chuck, me.
Okay, so initially what we were tasked with here was just whether or not we want to recommend to City Council to do a feasibility study. I think without polling everybody, I think we're kind of on the same page that we want to do that. It's just, I don't think we need to lay out exactly what the feasibility study is going to look like. It sounds like the sort of consensus is that we want to not just have it, originally we're talking about municipal utility, but now we want to expand it and say, I guess what I'm trying to say is we don't need to overcomplicate this too much in order to get it to City Council at this stage. Maybe later on, when the RFP goes out or whatever, the request to get the study, especially city staff would be more directly involved in tailoring exactly what we want at that point. But maybe at this stage, all we really need to say is that we want a feasibility study and we want it to generally consider the various options that we have. And then we can kind of indicate, the ones that we think might be good to look at. And maybe whoever does the feasibility study can also have their, throw in their possibilities. And in the end, I think what we want though is maybe not one thing, this is what you should do, but here are a couple different options and here's the pros and cons of each of them. But like I said, I don't think we need to get too hung up right now because this is just saying City Council, we want this study to be done.
Thanks, Noah. Mark?
So I think that's exactly what the second clause done. First of all, it is part of the feasibility study. If you look at the resolved, it says we want Ann Arbor to authorize and fund a study to determine feasibility of establishing municipal electric utility, including estimates, DTEs, revenues, and And the second one says, the study recommends that this study that we just talked about in Resolution 1 also look at the other pathways and other options that could impact this. So it's hard for me to, I would never vote for a feasibility study that said we're not going to look at other pathways and options that could impact the cost of this project. We're not saying go out and do a My Green Power feasibility study and spend $150,000 studying My Green Power. No one says that. It is, these are the things that are happening, and there'll be other things that will come up while we're doing this. And we should factor them into the feasibility study that we do that talks about that. And Ann Arbor recommends that Ann Arbor City Council authorize and fund a study. You want to inject the word feasibility study in front of study, okay, but it says study to determine the feasibility of establishing these things. And it says, look at these other things that should be part of the feasibility study. I don't see how this is. I don't understand the concern here. Doesn't make sense to me to say, let's do a feasibility study, but don't study the feasibility of these things. In writing, in a resolution, we're saying don't do it. It seems crazy to me. I'm missing something. Maybe somebody could elucidate to me better. I don't get it.
Chuck and Erica, and then I'll chime in after Erica.
Mark, I think we're missing, what are we recommending? A feasibility study, this could be $1 billion feasibility study. What are we asking them to look at specifically? All the technical, this could be an endless barrage of activity. And I think we really need to be more crisp about what this feasibility is expected to deliver to us. it will eventually lead to a scope document that is written for an RFP, I suspect, for consultants to bid on, who will then will select from, right? And I'd like to have some visibility in this. As it was pointed out, if we're an advisory committee to or commission to the city council, hopefully they trust us a little bit to have a neutral voice in how this shapes up and moves forward. I think
Well,
that's
then
pretty critical.
I agree with you. I agree with you. Can you give us language in the first resolve that would say a stage one scope feasibility study, or let's put a label on this that has, that's recognizable by all parties of what it is we're talking about.
Yeah,
That would help, I think.
we can use a stage gate approach, which is pretty common in industry to do this. It's a stage one activity. We can be very precise about it. I think we also need to be realistic about what kind of schedule are we requesting here. I think the city council is looking for us to recommend a study, but this is not a 3-year event. We need this to be done pretty quickly. How does this get done? And we should recommend in this resolution somehow what the end date should be and how do we get there? What's the pathway to get this done? There's nothing on schedule in here, and everything I do in my life is schedule dictated.
Councilmember Briggs.
Thanks. I did just kind of want to go back to the resolution that council passed in terms of what was asked for out of Energy Commission. And I won't read fully every resolved clause, but the ones that are pertinent is that, we're asking whether or not the commission believes city council should undertake a feasibility to understand options related to creating a municipal utility, including traditional and non-traditional models. So that's that does lead to some of these other components that are within this resolution, that the resolution explicitly discusses how the utility aligns with our goals, the criteria that's in one of here, and that it's explicitly discusses how it aligns with our values, which is also in here. So council has asked for the commission to weigh in kind of, potentially on both traditional and non-traditional. I guess a question to Missy, if you don't mind. I think council also will have a little bit of discussion around this, and I anticipate this is what you would be, staff would be working on next in terms of, there are questions here around kind of scope and how that might balloon into cost and schedule. And so kind of how do you anticipate, this is fairly broadly worded right now, making sure that if the commission approves this and then council ultimately approves this, the staff has enough guidance to make sure that this isn't a monster study with no timeline.
Yeah, so the way that I can think about it, there's a lot sort of in there, which is a great question. One, that these studies happen. So we're not sort of writing something from scratch. We have a lot of template language to be able to pull from others who have done traditional municipal utility feasibility studies. We're adding an options analysis, but we're saying do a parallel, like robust analysis of things. And this resolution actually gives a lot of guidance to us about the things we're going to ask for. We're going to ask for them to evaluate it based on the energy principles and criteria. We're going to ask for them to evaluate it based on timeline. We're going to ask for them to evaluate it based on transformation and equity and sustainability as values. We actually have a lot inherent in this resolution that gives direction about what it is we're going to write in an RFP and send out to get bids on. But I don't feel a lot of ambiguity. I think that the ambiguity I have is about what else is in the requests that we put out to the market. And I think that sort of centers on, are we doing an options analysis or are we really evaluating one thing? And that's where I think I'm looking for direction from this body.
Ember, go ahead, and then I'll comment after you.
Yeah. Sorry, I was switching between. I have notes in two different places, but yeah. I mean, I think Chuck articulated like some of the concerns I have around like it does this become $1 billion study, right? Or like a study that takes 3 years is if we're not defining the specificity of like what a feasibility study means for the other options, like. So the first resolve clause, no, I lost word. Oh, it's in my Word document. Okay. The first resolve clause, like very specifically like articulates some of the things that are needed for a feasibility study of a traditional municipal utility, but not necessarily all of those things make sense for the other options. So it says like, it also, like it becomes more broad for what we're looking for the other options. So I think that's something that could be then refined more, that like mitigates some of my concerns about like, what does analyzing the feasibility of Michigan green power mean, right? And I think that's where I still like don't understand, or like, what is analyzing the technical feasibility of like community choice aggregation mean? And maybe to Noah's point, like those things don't need to be articulated in this specific resolution, but it also means like, how do we control then like this spiraling from something that we think might cost $120,000 and could take, you know, less than 6 months to something that could be much more. And I think that's still where like, I don't understand like, you know, where that difference lies. Or like the fact that, you know, Missy said that we don't really need an SCU feasibility analysis because we already have that from the technical experts. So, but we're asking for that in this study or in this resolution as it's written right now. And so I see some like questions and dissonance in those places. And I think just what Missy, what you were just saying also made me think like, you know, I think we want to evaluate these options against like the A20 goals, against, you know, the other things you were saying, the timeline and things like that. But one thing that I had originally written in is like, we also want to determine the feasibility of a municipal utility based on, you know, its ability to apply a supply power relative to DTE, and also like thinking about the revenue that's coming in from the city. So I think that's also something that could be re-added around like, you know, we're also still, at the end of the day, DTE is still the current provider that we need to be also basing off of these options, I think too. Which Michigan Green Power being a component of that, but not the only component.
Go ahead, Edie.
It's okay, John, you can go first.
That's all right.
I guess one thing that I'm hearing kind of from what Ember's saying and what others are saying, you know, is there's a lack of clarity around on the second clause, you know, is it a feasibility study or is it not for these additional components? And so maybe there's a language modification we can make that really indicates that it's more like you were saying, Ember, a desirability comparison, or something that's specified that it's more like legal framework and technical capacity of these subsequent things and not a full feasibility study, to kind of reduce concerns around ballooning costs and timelines. Maybe that's, you know, maybe a little bit of clarity there. Because I do agree, it doesn't seem to say feasibility study, so I don't think we should read that into it necessarily, but maybe we could be more clear to really indicate that that's not a full feasibility analysis for those other options.
So if I may weigh in before you, Commissioner George, hopefully it'll help bring us to some closer resolution to this point. So I think maybe just going back in history, we were requested by A2P2 to look at a feasibility study of municipalization through condemnation, period. And I think we're now, from what I'm hearing, at a different point. And that different point is something that, frankly, I'm used to, having worked in industry. And when things like this come forward, typically what is done is we're asking for some experts who do this all the time to weigh in and provide us the relative value propositions of the options that they feel are the strongest and best options for us, with input from us, of course, and to evaluate that proposition on a number of parameters based on the values and the criteria that, you know, that Missy talked about, that was passed by council last December, talking about carbon neutrality by 2030. I think something that Chuck stated earlier is very important. There are other parameters like the reliability that's important, like the cost that's important, et cetera. and to provide us an analysis of the various options that they think are the best without us being, in my view, overly prescriptive. Because if we're overly prescriptive, then the experts then are not in a position to be able to say, this is what we recommended. I mean, they may still do that anyhow, but if we're overly prescriptive, they're less likely to do that. And I think we want them to give us what the value propositions are, what the relative risks and pros and cons are. And the way we bound that is by putting a price tag on it, which basically tells them how much resources that they can put into it. And we also bound it by putting a time frame on it. And that's, as somebody else said earlier, exactly what happens in business and industry is someone says, we need an analysis along these lines. You tell us what the best options are. You tell us the relative value propositions are. You tell us what the risks are. You tell us of the likelihood of success, including, for example, if we do municipalization by condemnation, I think we also want analysis of what's the likelihood of success. How much money are we going to have to put into this upfront in terms of education, in terms of marketing, in terms of trying to convince the residents of Ann Arbor to vote for condemnation. I mean, I think all these things are a part of this value proposition. And so my sense is that somewhere in the wording, we want to talk about the relative, what are the different options that the party that does the analysis lays out various options, tells us what those various value propositions are, and they do it in a certain time frame within a certain budget. And then we sort of leave it at that. We don't tell them just to do one option like we were talking about at the very beginning, but we ask them to tell us with all of their experience, what's the best way forward. Commissioner George.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all of the debate that has been had on this. I would like us to come to some sort of resolution to this conversation. I think that we've highlighted that there is some disagreement over what the language is. I think, the question on this is whether we want to vote this through as it is, as it stands tonight, or are we going to take another month and have the folks that have been shepherding this continue to work on some of this language to try and get and make everybody happy. So, I'd prefer we move to that conversation so that we can continue to move this process along. I personally think that, I'm very torn at the moment. I think that I could vote for it as it stands right now. I could vote for it in a month. I do hear some of the concerns that have been raised, but I think that we really need to make sure that we're staying on topic here about what is exactly in front of us, and are we actually going to take action on this tonight, or are we going to punt it for another month and have more language tweaks, as a number of folks have suggested. So I would encourage us to steer towards that conversation.
Thanks for bringing that into focus. Commissioner Peck, and then Commissioner Clevey, Commissioner McCoy, and I think we should all take Commissioner George's advice into consideration. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll agree with that. And I also really liked what you had to say, John. But everyone here has had some very valuable comments. So it's a thoughtful conversation. Just for a reflection, I compare this with what we did at University of Michigan for our carbon neutrality effort. And we did put out an RFP asking for a consultant firm who does this for a living to weigh all the options and give us the pros and cons, but also to do it in a way that was give and take and discussion with our team. And Missy was involved in this, so she has a firsthand idea of how it can get a little frustrating at times, but at the same time, how it could really work. And I do believe we have staff, particularly Missy, but her other staff and other members of this team even who can interact if we write the RFP right. And I don't think we should be writing the RFP tonight or ever. I think we should leave that up to the staff. We just want to say, let's get it out and let's consider all the alternatives. And let's have an option while we're doing that, whoever's doing it, to be able to present and then be queried and then provide answers to those queries. Because I think if we do that, staff will get the information city council needs to move forward with our advice. Thank you.
Commissioner Clevey, then Commissioner.
Commissioner George, I very much appreciate what you're saying, and so I'm going to offer a suggestion. So my suggestion is this. We take these resolved 1 and we take resolved 2. We take resolved 1 and we say, resolved that the Ann Arbor Energy Commission recommends that the City of Ann Arbor authorize and fund a study 2 and eliminate everything else that's in that section. Drop down to the next section, take out the first line of that second resolved and pick up and say, 2, second line, analyze and propose multiple potential pathways the city could take to meet its A20 energy-related emissions reductions and clean energy goals, period, and eliminate everything after that. And we take that and we vote it through. So again, take the first resolved, keep the first line and the second line up to the word 2, kill off everything else in the first resolved, drop down, kill off the first sentence of the second resolved, pick up 2, analyze and propose multiple potential pathways the city could take to meet its A20 emission goals reduction, clean energy goals, period, kill off everything else in resolved number 2, keep everything after that. And we send it on. I think that meets all of the needs we were talking about, where we've already made the decision. We're not going to endorse a resolution that was given to us that calls for a single traditional municipal utility feasibility study and nothing else. So we're pretty clear that we don't want to do that. So with this, it ties us to A20. It says, let's do a study and find the best pathways. And if doing that study, we're going to be looking at rates, values, we're going to look at everything, polls, we're going to analyze everything and come up with a decision about the best way to achieve that goal. That's my suggestion.
Can I ask for one clarification just to make sure I get this edit before it's considered? Commissioner Cleary, what was the first 2 that you ended in the first resolve clause? Was it after? Sorry,
after the word 2, mid-sentence, second line, and fund a study 2.
And end at study?
And at 2, T-O. And take out everything else in that
Don't think
resolution.
that sentence makes sense.
In the first resolve clause? Or
yes, in the first resolve clause. Resolve that the Ann Arbor Energy Commission recommends the Ann Arbor City Council authorize and fund a study 2, and then eliminate everything else after that, and the first line of the second resolved. So then it reads 2, analyze and propose multiple potential pathways. Okay.
So it's one resolve merged into 2.
It's one resolve merged into 2. Okay. Throw out the stuff that Amber's concerned about, the excess detail. It leaves it open enough that we can look at multiple pathways. We say in the other ones, do a thorough study, pick a decent contractor, make sure that whatever it is, the goal of the community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030, A20 plan and energy criteria and principles, that those things are included. And then we say, and we don't want to wait. So we want to move on the SEU now, and here's what we want to do right now because it's further developed than these other options, and we don't want to wait, and it's compatible with, as far as we understand, is compatible with any other option we're going to look at, including traditional municipal utilities.
Missy, I have a question. Are you able to work in Word and modify this with strikeout or whatever so that we can actually look at something just before we vote?
If the commission wants to take this one up, for sure. I just made the changes in a separate document. I'm not sure if it's friendly to the body, so I have it sort of as a side. But yeah, I can do that if we feel like we're close. Yeah.
So Chuck may have a friendly amendment to add some technical language about stage gate or whatever. If you want to put some scope around that study, that would be a welcome addition. That's my suggestion.
Commissioner McCoy, Commissioner Hookham, Commissioner Juneau.
Yeah, I was also going to recommend something based on what Robert had said, but it was different in that I was going to suggest we move the conversation and vote on this in December. But one thing that I found challenging over the course of the last month was like only having the conversation via email with like a couple people due to the Open Meetings Act limitations. Like I couldn't get feedback on some of the additions or like why people wanted certain things because I couldn't talk to the other commissioners about it. So I was going to suggest trying to move to have a public like working session sometime between now and the December meeting to work on this for like a subgroup of people who want to contribute to it. So that we could do it not like offline in a way that could like the conversation can continue with the people who want to and can contribute to it and then vote in December.
Before we leave your suggestion, can we take that up briefly? My understanding is that we could have a subgroup that does the editing if we decide indeed to take that path forward, but it would have to be less than a quorum of the commission. Is that not correct, or is that correct? So we could agree tonight that, you know, persons A, B, C, D, and E could meet to hammer this out and then bring it back for a vote in December. Is that, I just wanted to clarify that that's possible, is it not? I saw a few nods, but I didn't, okay, it sounds like it's possible. Okay, so Commissioner Hookham?
Yeah, John, to capture your thoughts, I think we also in this sharpening the saw, to use another Stephen Covey word, we should add something in there, something along the lines. The Energy Commission recommends a maximum budget of $200,000 be applied, and that this work be completed by June 1, 2022, as bookends. The council can take us up on it, or they can change the numbers, but at least we're recommending this get done in a reasonable timeline for a reasonable budget. I'm open to changing some of the numbers. I could probably go lower and faster, but I think we need to give bookends in the recommendation.
I would support that too. I want to throw out one other proposal, and that is that we can craft a resolution, vote on it, approve it, but that doesn't mean that that has to be exactly the same resolution that our council liaisons take to council. That's my understanding. They would most likely present our resolution, but the final resolution that council votes on could potentially, if we're really trying to accelerate this process, we could vote on something tonight that is a 90% solution, and then take this offline in a smaller group that then works with council to draft the final resolution, where council would be able to say, this is the product of the Energy Commission. We recognize that we wanted to move forward quickly, and therefore we didn't try to craft the 99.999% solution, but we took it to this point, and these are some of the open potential issues, and we're going to include those and address those in the final resolution that's considered by council. So I'd like just to throw that out there as another option. And Council Member Radina, go ahead and riff off of that, or anything else you want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just wanted to comment briefly on the idea of kind of going into a work session and then coming back in December. And I think my thought on that is, I think everybody at this table, or this virtual table, has expressed a lot of of thought and interest in this topic. And I guess even if we were to take some additional time and have a work session, a subquorum work session working on something, I guess I wonder to the extent that the December meeting is different than the conversation we're having tonight, where folks who weren't at the table might have additional thoughts and want to change things and tweak things. And so I guess I in part agree with the sentiment that I think we can probably work out a solution and keep this moving forward on an expedited timeline to the extent possible. I would also add just simply to, I appreciate Commissioner Hookham's comment about kind of adding some bookends to this. I guess the other thing I will add is, while I would ultimately encourage us to emphasize kind of the urgency with which we want this completed, I am also hesitant to support a date where we are dictating to the person that we're doing this work to by when it needs to be completed, because I think we want complete work. I don't think we want to be rushing towards a specific date, while I would like it as quickly as possible, unless we are certain that something can be done by a certain timeline. I would hate to put an arbitrary deadline on it that couldn't be met.
Briggs.
Yeah, I would concur with what Councilmember Medina suggested, which is, I think the budget will somewhat be limited by our available funds. And I worry about setting a kind of an arbitrary date, because I'm not sure exactly when the RFP is going to end up going out. And, I think there's some challenges around that. But it sounds like to me, in terms of kind of, there's been a lot of potential wordsmithing around this, but ultimately, I've only heard, I guess I've heard a lot of different sentiments, but it seems like the major struggle has been around considering if the second resolve clause creates with sort of the options listed in that, if that is too broad or not. And I think that's something the commission needs to wrestle with and should wrestle with tonight. I mean, it's, are folks comfortable with asking council to do more than a traditional feasibility study, or does the Energy Commission want to see more out of that study? That's sort of, I think, at least part of the advice that I'm seeking to take back to council.
Commissioner Hookham.
Yeah, Councilwoman Briggs, could you give us a little guidance there on budget and what kind of limitations we have? I mean, do we have funding to get to $200,000, or is that a big stretch? We have some precedents about what other consultants have charged other cities for similar studies. We know what that looks like. Is that something in the realm, or are we talking about $50,000 or something different?
I might punt that a little bit more to Dr. Stoltz here, who's been probably thinking a little bit more about the budgetary impacts and where that might come from. So I don't know. Do you mind speaking to that?
Yeah, one, we should say that this was never budgeted, right? Period. Any of these studies, a traditional utility, what we're talking about now, that's not in the budget. So whatever we do, we're going to have to find the money for. Period. So to the extent you want me to give you an estimate of what that's going to cost, I can't right now, but it has become very clear. I've started to look at the budget to find space for this kind of a study, and I assume this will come from our office's budget.
So, Missy, when you said whatever we do, but that does not include moving forward on the SEU, because we can move forward on that within budget, correct?
Right, with the exception that I still would want to do a technical study on the microgrid.
No, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. Right. Yeah, but everything else, no, we can move forward with existing budget and existing staff on that.
If I can also just jump in really briefly on that point, because this is something that I talked to our acting administrator about, and it's something that is on my agenda to talk with our interim administrator about. I am also interested in trying to pursue budget options that do not take away from the existing work that OSI is already doing. And so I am going to encourage us to explore other funding options as well, and other places in the budget where we might be able to find some savings, so that we are minimizing the impact that a feasibility study would have on all of the other competing work that OSI is doing. And so I think that is an ongoing conversation, is I guess all I'm trying to add to that.
I think it's a good discussion. I think we just all have to realize that there is some opportunity cost somewhere at the end of this equation. It's coming out of somebody's budget. It's coming out of city's reserves, or it's taking away from the city being able to do something completely potentially unrelated to A20. So it's not that this is just money that's falling from heaven to be able to fund this. And I think that's one of the things we need to consider, as council certainly will. So what I'm going to ask Missy is that if you could put up the document based on what I consider to be in the form of friendly amendments. We haven't actually voted on them, and then we can maybe actually, after looking at something, see whether or not we can get a vote on a friendly amendment and move forward on this, or if people just feel uncomfortable with resolving this tonight and prefer to take this offline with a smaller group where we're still within the bounds of Open Meeting Act, and come back in December with an alternative formulation. So my understanding is we haven't changed anything in any of the resolve clauses, other than the one or two little things that were mentioned at the very beginning of this discussion. And I think the main thing that we see here is what Commissioner Clevey has recommended. Although Commissioner Clevey, what I saw in red wasn't, I don't think, exactly what you said. Missy, this is the original formulation, right?
So this is what I suggest that we do, yes.
Oh, okay, okay.
This is it, right. So fold in those two like that, and that's what I'm recommending we do.
Yep.
Because we said above it, people have said the whereas about doing a traditional utility, and then there's a whereas about the of sustainability. And whereas these are not mutually exclusive or collectively exhaustive, but both necessitate additional investigation typically conducted. Then we say, okay, so therefore, and this is the new resolve that follows on that. So it's both broadening and narrowing. We're not dictating exactly what that means, but we know what we want to end up with.
Can I get a motion to consider this and discuss it with some potential tweaks?
Can I do that?
Yes.
Well, I think I did, right? I put forth that motion.
Did
And we
move.
have a second from
Second.
Commissioner George. So comments on this? Commissioner McCoy.
Yeah, and thank you for putting this on the screen. This makes it easier. So I think this is now actually back to like what was originally sent to me when I think after Missy compiled a bunch of commissioners' comments. It's very similar to what I saw a couple weeks ago. And the reason that we added, like I asked to add the paragraph that's now removed, the resolve clause that's now removed, which I don't know, yeah, Missy, if you can show what you deleted. All right, this is confusing. Yeah, so the reason I asked to add those things is to ensure those are important components of a traditional municipalization feasibility study. And so I wanted to make sure they were named, and those are things that are going to be assessed in that component of the feasibility study. And so that's why I inserted that paragraph last week. So I think I understand the streamlining of it, but I would just want to ensure that that's still a component of the feasibility study, that those pieces that are unique to a traditional municipal utility are still a part of the feasibility study that is funded by the city. And then it doesn't just become an options analysis. So I think it's also just a difference in knowing that a shorter resolution from us that has less detail, also means that there's more like things up for interpretation, right? And so I think that's also some of the conversations that have circled tonight. It's like we're reading the same piece of paper differently, right? And so I think that's like where some of my concern comes in, is just like wanting to make sure that those pieces that are essential to a traditional municipal feasibility study and are unique to those are still part of whatever ultimately comes through at the end of the line, no matter what the language is and what our resolution passes tonight. If that makes sense.
Risky, can I offer something? I know there are other hands, so I apologize.
Yes, please. And then Commissioner Clevey after that. Go ahead.
Commissioner McQuaid, one thought would be, I really appreciate what you're saying. Is there a workaround where we take the sentiment that's highlighted right now that gets to that specificity and put it in a whereas clause, so it's defined what we mean by a feasibility study, and so that way the resolves can be more succinct, but the description is above, draw from?
Commissioner McCoy, you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense if we say like, whereas it's like hard for me to think about. Yeah, if we say like, whereas like a traditional municipal feasibility study, like we define what that means for that component, I think that would work, yes. So we know that those are the components. When we say we want a traditional municipal feasibility study, you know, including all these things that we mean, that's what we mean. Yeah, sorry, the words are not coming to me very well.
So let me throw my 2 cents in on that. So I think of all of us sitting here, the only person who's ever done a feasibility study on a traditional utility is Chuck Hookham. So I guess I have 2 questions to Chuck. One is, do we need to actually tell you how to do your job or tell somebody else how to do their job that does this? And by being this specific, are we actually limiting ourselves because we're leaving out important things? I mean, is there it seems to me that feasibility study of a municipal utility is probably, you could find that in textbooks and it would describe it. So do we have to do this? Do we have to describe this? We don't describe how a solar cell works. So I'll turn that over to Chuck. It's a question to Chuck. I'll go with whatever Chuck says. I'll be glad to.
I'm sure Missy and her staff could probably put together the right words to make this happen. I was trying to understand what our budget limit was, because this is getting pretty specific and pretty detailed and will take time and budget to get done. I also would like to take this moment to say I think we're still mincing words and shaking things around a bit, and it's 9 o'clock at night, and I don't have little kiddos to put to bed, but I'm mindful of everybody else. And I would suggest we're not under any time crunch. Let's have a small group get this pulled together offline and have it ready for December that's in a better form.
Commissioner Briggs.
Thanks. I am struggling a little bit to understand why we would remove those first 2 resolved clauses in the way that they currently were. I think they provided some clarity to the community and to council about what exactly the Energy Commission was expecting out of the study, and it takes a lot of the meat out of that. So I understand it's providing it, trying to not create any artificial limits to the study, to the options analysis potentially, but I'm worried that I guess I have a few concerns around that, but I will, this is recommendation to council, so I will listen to wherever Energy Commission goes on this.
Commissioner George.
So just from a process standpoint, we have the amendment, the language amendment on the floor. I think that we should either take a motion to table insofar as what Commissioner Hookham said, to allow this whole thing to be brought up back in December for a further vote and discussion after a working group has met and so forth, or we take a vote on the friendly amendment and that goes up or down, and then we then take a vote on this. So I would encourage us to make that decision. So, Mr. Chairman, I would encourage you to ask for a vote, one way or another.
I think Councilmember Briggs, you had your hand up from before, right? So I think that's good counsel. I think the way that you presented it was maybe first to take a vote on tabling the issue and taking it back up after a smaller group works on this in our December meeting.
Just via Robert's rules, we have a motion on the floor for an amendment, and we need to vote on that,
okay,
which is what Mark, this language that Mark proposed. So I think we have to do that first.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second on Mark's amendment? I don't know that we did.
It received a second.
Second, okay.
George seconded.
Okay, so all those in favor of making the changes as we see, not here, is this, I guess this is it, as shown here, everything crossed out, right? You were toggling between two different documents, so I think this is what we're voting on.
I was toggling between two different views of the document. So this is the same document. It's in cross out is what's been merged into the book. If it's here, I could try this.
Okay, yeah.
There you go.
There we go. Yep. So all those in favor of adopting this language, in this case, I'm going to ask that you go off speaker and so that we can, and also but to raise your hand so I can get a better sense. And let me see if all those in favor of this change, say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
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 I'm sorry, can you keep your hands up? I got to do a roll call on this one. Okay. Got it.
All those, so I'm going to ask who's against and then just for abstention. So those who are against, please raise your hand.
Aye.
Can you keep your hands up? Okay. Okay, got it.
So I guess I have a question. Are we voting on this as a resolution, pass or fail, or are we also have a resolution? We also
only the amendment. It was only the amendment.
Only the amendment. Okay.
Right.
Yep. Okay, good. So as I understand it, the amendment passes.
Now we vote on the
7 to
resolution.
5.
Pardon me?
It's
Now we
7 to
vote.
5.
I'm sorry.
There were
And
6
now-
against.
And there were 7-4.
So
Now we can call the question, which I do because
So then there's the
We got
second
the nomination in a
suggestion. Do we
No.
table this? Look at what we have discussed tonight in a smaller group, bring it back in our December meeting, potentially in the exact same form as it is right now, potentially modified, and then vote on it in our December meeting. Edie, you have a comment first.
Yeah, just a process question, because I mean, I guess since that just passed, what would we do going forward in terms of the work group? I guess there might be a lack of clarity there too.
I guess that's essentially what we would be voting on is, do people want to recraft this and tweak it a little bit, or do people feel comfortable as it is? I mean, some of the things that are still on the table that haven't been considered in this amendment are we putting a limit on this in terms of budget? Are we putting a limit on in terms of timetable? Are we taking into account changing the whereas clause? We cut it out. There was one suggestion of potentially moving it into a whereas clause. That was Ember's suggestion. So those kinds of things potentially would be considered, and potentially others between now and December. Does that answer your question? That's at least my understanding. Ember, go ahead.
Well, Edie can answer if it answered her question first.
Pardon me?
I didn't know if there was a response from Edie first. No. Yeah, I was just gonna motion to table this to a working group to talk about those questions that you just outlined, John.
So that's a motion. Do we have a second? Second from Bridget?
Second.
Okay. We have a couple of seconds. So the motion is to table this for tonight, to take it to a working group and bring it back in potentially exactly the same form or another form, addressing some of the questions that I outlined, potentially others, for consideration by the commission in our December meeting. All of those in favor of tabling, raise your hand and say aye.
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 Can I please have hands back up again? This is gonna be a good one. Thank you.
Oh, man.
The oh man, I'm not sure that counts as a vote. Okay.
So all those against, you can also abstain, or so
Against, one more time, just to see.
it's Commissioner Levin,
Trevor, Levin,
George,
Medina.
Radina, and Clevey, and Kerber.
Okay.
And go ahead.
Motion passes.
Edie, did you want to comment, or
Did
do you
you-
have a vote?
Did you get Commissioner Juneau?
I'm not sure where, Commissioner Juneau, were you
He's against.
against? Did someone abstain? Okay,
Larry
I think we have to do a roll call vote because I think we got a 7-7. But Mhm.
Okay, so roll call. Do you want to do a roll call then, Missy, or I guess I do the roll call?
If you can do roll call, I can capture notes.
Yep, that's easier. So I'm just going to go as people appear on my screen. I'll go last. Commissioner Clevey,
No.
this is no to,
Table.
yes to table, and no means to take a vote and finalize this tonight. Commissioner Clevey
Yes.
is no.
No.
No. Commissioner McComber,
Yes.
Commissioner George,
No.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Radina.
No.
Was that a no?
Those are no.
Okay.
No.
Commissioner Stevenson,
Yes.
Commissioner Juneau,
No.
Commissioner Hookham,
Yes.
Commissioner McCoy,
Yes.
Councilmember Briggs,
Yes.
Commissioner Levin,
No.
no. Commissioner Kerber,
No.
Commissioner Overpeck,
Yes.
and I vote also yes.
Motion passes.
So what I would then ask, since this essentially is tabled now, is could we get agreement on who would be interested in working in this subgroup? I'd maybe like to keep it to, I mean, Missy, we'd obviously like to include you, I think. And I would recommend maybe we keep it to something like 4 commissioners. Does that sound about right? So who would be interested in doing so?
I would be.
Want to just raise your hands? So Commissioner Clevey, Commissioner McCoy, Commissioner Hookham. I'd be interested as well. Anybody else has a burning desire? That doesn't mean you won't have an opportunity to weigh in the December meeting, obviously, and we would get this out well in advance so that you can consider it. So I think we have 4 people plus Missy to do this.
I just want to be really transparent that there is not a lot of free time on OSI's side for these meetings to take place. So we're gonna have to be really creative as a working group to make this happen.
Yep,
This
understood.
is above and beyond at the point. Yeah.
Understood. Well, it's almost, we can do a Christmas.
No, we won't.
That's
do
not
that.
far off from the availability I have. Yeah.
That's
Merry
not a Christmas
Christmas.
present that we are interested in entertaining. Okay, so we're going to table this, and I will take it as a task to set up a meeting. I'll put out a when to meet poll, and hopefully we can get at least an hour to work on this and to whittle this down. Hopefully, maybe I'll even try to set up 2 meetings so that we can get through this well in advance of December. So that's it with our 2 agenda points. So now we have a couple of other things as sort of cleanup. I'll just go ahead and read them all off. Reports from OSI and news from commissioners, and it's not mentioned explicitly, but also city council liaisons, working group updates and report from the Environmental Commission, and then public input, and then items for the next agenda. So Missy, do you want to start first with reports from OSI? Maybe you can keep this short by just saying you issued a report, correct?
We just issued a newsletter yesterday. You all should have received it. Please enjoy updates from OSI at your reading pleasure.
So, news from commissioners. Anything burning from commissioners? News from and announcements, whatever, from city council liaisons. Yes.
I guess just on the embodied carbon, we're working on finalizing some language, and Chair Murski should probably see something there soon.
I would appreciate that, because we've talked before in the other context about limiting this time-wise, and this has been in discussion since also July, so or June actually, I think. So yes, I would appreciate that. Okay, working group updates and from the Environmental Commission. Carlene, anything to report of substance from transportation electrification?
No, not at this time.
Okay. I don't think, well, there is a small working group that's working on energy concierge services. Very briefly, we have a meeting with Boulder tomorrow to talk about some ideas, and so we'll be able to give you some feedback in the next meeting. We have what we think is maybe a creative approach, and hopefully it resonates with the folks at Boulder that already have such a service in place. Edie, can you give us an update with highlights from the Environmental Commission?
Yeah, thank you. At the last Environmental Commission, we had some presentations on plastics use in the city, and also a presentation on sort of operationalizing or making more tangible some of our zero waste goals, which certainly would play into some of the city's energy goals. But I think that should cover the report out for today.
Thank you. Any questions, people, feel free to circle back to Edie. So next is public input. I'll get my old script here, just a second. Somewhere, let's see, where is it? Here we go. So this is an opportunity for persons to speak up to 3 minutes. If you're watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 937-6751-6819. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9. On your phone, you will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area. You need background noise. so that we may hear you clearly, and finally state your name and your address. How many people hung with us, Missy?
You, caller ending in 818.
Hey, can you hear me?
We do.
My name is Chris Lewis. I live on 7th Street in Ward 5. I've been listening into the discussion and appreciate everyone's thoughts on this issue. One thing that it seemed like there was some differences on that it didn't seem like there were a lot of clarity to me is what are technical questions that a consultant for the city should be answering versus what are political questions that voters or their elected representatives should be deciding. So for instance, it could be that there's more than one way to meet the 820 goals, and maybe some of those ways are more expensive, but might provide benefits in terms of electric reliability, and others are cheaper and might not have those benefits. And I think a consultant in a study would be well suited to explaining those trade-offs, but in terms of like recommending the best approach, I don't think that's what a feasibility study or any other kind of study should focus on. I think that's a decision either for voters through a referendum or for city council. And I would just encourage that to be taken in mind going forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Good input.
Caller ending in 245. Caller ending in
Hello,
245, you are
am I
muted. Yep.
We hear you, yes.
Oh, okay. This is Catherine Murphy speaking. I live at 315 Linda Vista Street in Ward 5, and I've spoken to you before about some of these matters. And I've been following very carefully the discussion tonight, and it seems like it's gotten very complex, and it looks like people are trying very hard to get to the bottom of it and align things so everybody can be pleased with what comes out in the end. I just want to say that I have originally been very much involved in the support for municipalization feasible studies, and because I think we need to know if it makes economic sense in Ann Arbor, and I hope that the resolution as it's now worded will be able to get at that. I think one of the things that, maybe I should first say the discussion in the presentation at Mrs. Schultz about the SEU was beautifully done. And the people in Ann Arbor for Public Power also believe it's a good thing and should go forward right away. But I think also that the things that we had thought about for what you're calling the traditional means would be that it would let the community manage and responsibly service the ratepayers, and it takes the electric grid out of the hands of DTE, which has proven unreliable and has very limited plans for getting rid of fossil fuels as sources of energy. Community could also give back the money it earns to service the ratepayers rather than, as DTE, giving it back to investors. That is, it could stay in the city and not be paid out to shareholders. This last year, communities in Lansing and Traverse City earned over $1 million each, which they could reinvest in their communities. The muni in Winter Park, Florida, which spoke at the Energy Commission meeting last month, they used the money they earned to start undergrounding lines. So I think these concerns relative to DTE and relative to concerns about fossil fuels should stay in the conversation. So I look forward to the meeting next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else, Missy?
A caller ending in 134.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Stultz and Chair Mirsky. This is Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. Appreciate the serious discussion tonight. The problem with the options analysis is it conflates feasibility with desirability, as Commissioner McCoy said. First, let's find out if a muni is feasible. That's a technical analysis. Then, only if it is, we can decide if it's desirable, especially since we should be pursuing all options for the foreseeable future. We don't need to choose, certainly not at this stage. An SEU, we know from Dr. Steltz's great presentation, is both feasible and highly desirable. We also know it's not enough. Paul Fenn told you back in March that only 10 to 20% of buildings are optimal sites for microgrids. An SEU can help us meet our clean grid goal, but it can't get us all the way there. We're probably even close. The Muni, on the other hand, can execute power purchase agreements, including for offshore wind, to meet that shortfall, which the SEU cannot do because it lacks the necessary poles and wires. So the SEU and the Muni are complementary. CCA is currently illegal in Michigan, that can wait, and VPPAs and My Green Power aren't a big part of any clean grid solution. The Muni feasibility study has to be well done with defined scope, as Commissioner Hookham pointed out. It should include a detailed engineering assessment and system analysis. Engineers make site visits to all DTE substations, also look at transformers and lines to evaluate their age and their condition. Economists will calculate average and peak system loads based on regulatory filings and city data. They'll apply FERC and MPSC filings to evaluation using both income and cost approaches. They'll model future coal, gas, and renewable prices and derive comparative cost and cash flow for DTE versus Muni scenarios. All this must be done accurately so you can trust the results. Very few consulting firms out there have the necessary knowledge and experience. There's EES and NewGen and maybe a few others. The idea that they can do this new expanded study for under $200,000 or even $500,000 is wishful thinking. And there's no need, because we should pursue every option at this stage, not spend scarce funds comparing them. The Muni is the only one whose economic feasibility we don't know. Let's find that out while advancing the SEU. So any resolution should be about feasibility. Thank you.
That's all, Chair.
Anyone else, Missy? No.
That's all.
Okay. Lots of good discussion, lots of good insights, good comments at the end. Thanks everybody for hanging with all of us through the whole evening, and hopefully we bring back to you a refined resolution in December that resonates with everybody, and we can get this on to council. So thanks very much. And with that, it is 9:20, what is it, 24? And I adjourn this meeting. Thanks very much.
Thank you.